Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That's not on. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Isn't it nice? Is that not going to work? Battery. All right. Well, we'll shout. We'll shout.
Do you want this one?
No, that one won't work on the microphone. Hopefully you can all hear me. It's a small room, so if I talk loudly, I think you'll be able to hear me okay. Isn't it nice to be back having one of these? It's slightly smaller attendance than we've had in the past, but it's the first conference we've had for, well, since before COVID. And it's really nice to be back here listening to some excellent speakers. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, the traditional owners of the land on which we gather. I respect their elders, past, present and future, and I commit myself to working with them to protect and preserve this land that we share so that it continues to be available for future generations to enjoy. We are lucky this morning to have, or today, to have three excellent speakers. Before I introduce the speakers, though, I would ask you, if you have a mobile phone, please turn it to silent or off. Thank you. The first speaker we have this morning is Paul Gallagher. Paul is a member of the MS Engagement Council. It means the same thing as Advisory Council, I think, just a different name. He's a published author, journalist and book editor. His political biography of the former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson won Book of the Year prize when it was published in 2006, and since then he's edited 15 or so other books. He has MS himself, and he's a regular contributor in articles to the news and been published in America, UK and here in Australia. He's actively involved in working for and with the MS community, and he's going to talk this morning about finding hope when everything else seems to be providing overwhelming challenges. So I invite you to welcome Paul Gallagher. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Is that all right? That's good. I'm seeing nods. I have to begin by an apology. I've probably met about 10 people here this morning who've looked at me in the face and go, "Do you know who I am?" And I realise, oh, that's right, they're on a Zoom call. And I've never met them, or it's only ever been over the video. So I apologise to all those people and to the rest of you, just in general. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people, and it's a pleasure actually to acknowledge them also as traditional owners. And I want to pay my respects to elders past and present for the Wurundjeri people and any other Aboriginal elders from communities who may be here today. I have a few other special thanks to give, and as I do so, I'm going to deftly experiment with the screen. Yes, and it works. Firstly, Nigel, at last count you were an OAM, is that correct? Leadership team, people with MS, members, guests, MS Plus for this great building, and a particular thank you for King Charles III. The former Prince of Wales, Earl of Chester, and now King Charles III, saw fit to synchronise his coronation for this day. Operation Golden Orb, which is in fact the secret code name, or not so secret now, for the coronation, has been long awaited, much planned, many years, and has arrived on this day. Do you like being guinea pigs, crash test dummies? Because I'm going to do something slightly experimental today. It's not painful for anyone but me. I'm going to read you my speech. I'm going to read you, in fact, I've constructed a book for this morning. Now, this could be the start of a book, or it's just a flash in the pan for this event here. Chapter 1. I've been away a while. I pause here after reading the chapter title of this section to state the obvious. I'm reading from words I wrote. As a writer, I hope you don't mind if I share my life, thoughts and hopes in the written word today. That's not the TED Talk orthodoxy of delivering a presentation, but it's my best way of being the real me, the right me, in this place among people who know what it is to live with multiple sclerosis. Today is also the second last day of the Melbourne Writers' Festival. In the program for this year's event, Artistic Director Michaela Maguire wrote these words. Throughout the last few discomforting years, many of us have felt far away from who we once were. Our circumstances, behaviours, even our personalities have changed, possibly forever. For a while, physical travel was impossible, and we relied solely on reading and, on streaming services as a way of being transported to other worlds, perspectives and states of mind. Reading is inherently connected with daydreaming and imagination. We get lost in books, the rest of the world falling away until someone interrupts to ask where we went. This year's theme, I've been away for a while, is an invitation to find our way back to each other, to ourselves, and to the very world we all inhabit. We welcome you to return to Melbourne Writers' Festival, to beloved books and writers, to what's familiar and what's new. I've been away for a while is nothing to be ashamed of or regret. For me, I've been away from this building for a while. I've been away from sitting in one of the meeting rooms, I think that way, with Dr. Sally Shaw, and sharing my Netflix queue as a way of avoiding harder conversations about managing illness and living with, instead of under, the textbook definitions of a life-altering disease. Sidebar, Sally is a wise soul, a gifted psychologist, you will find out later, rather than merely trained. She regularly saw through those little tactics of mine and deftly led me, carefully, switched my cue to something in the present, in the here. So, Paul, you said earlier, Sally said, looking down at her notes from the second minute of our session, about being embarrassed earlier. What happened that made you feel that way? Is that a good impression of Sally, for those who know? And are you following me okay, despite the lack of TED Talk theatrics? I promise this is the longest chapter. You won't be here all day. Chapter 2, Headlines and Galley Copy. In the great traditions of my trade as a journalist, I'm going to tell a story today to fill in the space beneath the headline. Finding hope when life is overwhelming, my fight with MS. The caption will be next. Some wording that goes beneath my photo. The caption. Pictured is Paul Gallagher's view from a wheelchair at the recent Anzac Day dawn ceremony in Lilydale. Not, I apologise, the famed Scottish footballer with Blackburn Rovers, a different Blackburn. Also pictured is Nigel Caswell, OAM, supporting me in this talk physically and figuratively. Nigel has been someone who has seen something in me beyond MS, beyond an image on Zoom calls, and today in the flesh for the first time. I've been away for a while. The story I'm going to share this morning should tell you something of the following. What do I do? Who am I? What do I live with? How the heck do I find hope with a life like mine, maybe like yours? Chapter 3, Making Words Work. Subtitle, What do I do? I possess or am known by a few titles professionally, and the bottom one's lost. I'm a print journalist across about 5 newspapers and journals in New South Wales, a graduate of the Journalism College in Bathurst, of all places that gave us such great communicators as Andrew Denton, and my wife and fellow writer and gifted sub-editor, Karen Gallagher. I have worked as a freelance writer, sub-editor, editor, and technically at times a photojournalist, though amateur. My publisher, Penguin Random House, would like to let you know I'm a member of its stable, a published author and biographer. And I'm an award winner, 2006 Book of the Year. That's my literary side, my writing world. In the MS community, I'm a peer support volunteer. I facilitate a telegroup of people across 2 states. I serve on the MS Community Engagement Council Victoria, and something I am particularly proud of, a past winner of, and I forgot to put it on the slide, but a past winner of the photography section of the MS Plus Art Awards. Very happy about that. And they've extended it till the 14th of May, so get in your artwork. Those are words detailing what I do or have done. As is typical in our culture, the answer to the question, what do you do, is intended to elicit a resume, a CV of our achievements, talents, and assets purchased. But does it tell who you are as a person? As if the list captures someone's true character and worth. Telling you what I do or have done does not tell you who I am. Chapter 4, a PhD in fatigue. Subtitle, Who I Am. I am a husband, father, grandfather, son, brother, friend. Those are my greatest achievements and continue to be my best-selling works. Their covers tell anyone about me without meeting me in person. And so back to the headline, back to the word hope. I have found that what I do is not who I am. And into this room, into your nerve centre that hears or reads these words, I want to say this. You are more than the sum of your parts, more than the titles you have accumulated, more than the vocational pursuits you've attained, or homes you've built, bought, rented, or leased. You are not the sum of what you do. Your value is not the length of your CV. In the world of recruitment, when someone seeks a job, the resume is dusted off, typos corrected, email address updated, and all the achievements are listed. But when a person dies, the dearest loved ones stand behind a lectern like this and describe what sort of person they miss, their character, legacy of love, friendship, loyalty. If I measured my life by what a typical day looks like, I'd have a PhD in fatigue, or a master's in pain, or maybe I'd be a professor of feeling crap. That's why I choose to not evaluate, describe, think of myself by the skills I have or titles I've attained. Chapter 5, Gentle Upright Piano in a Psych Ward. Besides what I do and who I am, I live with circumstances and events. In my life, I have lived with and live with and survived and thrived and come out the other side of life-altering illnesses. The first was major depression, such that it placed me in a psychiatric ward 11.4 kilometres away in Maroondah Hospital. I remember on our wedding anniversary in August 2000, Karen visiting me in a small room that had a thin, cheap curtain making Mount Dandenong Road look a little dreamy. She played gently on an upright piano, and we talked about me coming home between tears. The second was multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed in 2016, but had already experienced its first touches in my 20s, though not knowing it at the time. I'd stepped outside my car in a little country town called Bowraville, and my left leg did not work, would not hold me. A GP said I had gout. Another thought maybe there's a small chance, probably not, could be multiple sclerosis. He prescribed the wrong test and didn't follow up. In about 2013, the symptoms came back. This time a permanent tingling sensation in my arm, pins and needles switching on full time, then the chest hug, fatigue, balance problems, heat intolerance. By the time I lost my sight for 90 minutes one freaky day, I knew what it was. I'd seen Mum suffer from it, and it didn't take much for a very clear diagnosis by 2016. I say lived with and survived because I know what it is to live without it, like I know what a life living without major depression is. That term, lived with, is important. I remember what it was like living with functional limbs. I remember being a two-paced walker, fast to the bus and train, slow on the weekends taking my dog Lily to Montrose Reserve. I remember being quick in my mind. The unfogged days when you can see the sun on the horizon and you could almost forgive yourself for not packing the sunglasses, just exist and bake in the sunshine. My mum Judy lived with and survived polio too, although she would never say it defined her. Later in life, when she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, it broke some plates in our lives, but didn't change the name of the maker on the underside. I knew Mum, not MS Mum or polio Mum, like your loved ones know you. MS was an in and out disease initially for me, sometimes on, sometimes off, relapsing, remitting. Now I find it sticking around like some sort of full-time lodger I neither invited nor sought, and who never pays the rent, just costs me. Like many of you, my days are typically challenging. Sleep patterns are not patterns but spurts and trickles from a broken tap, and the plumber's busy. Pain is constant, only relieved by addictive prescriptions that make one drawer in my home look remarkably Walter Whitish. Brain fog is regularly frustrating. Or, what was I saying? And accessibility, mobility, going places requires constant attention, planning, and military-like logistics. So chapter 6, how the heck do I find hope with a life like mine? Subtitle, what I learnt from Jeff Probst and tribal councils. Well, I do not find hope in MS itself. In fact, I don't even like giving it the dignity of capital letters, nor do I like to say I have MS or suffer from MS. That helps. Nor do I get hope by personal internal fixation. As an introvert, there's more of a hobby than a viable, healthy pursuit to inner peace. Hope to me is a gift that is curiously found in, through, and beyond the consequences of and process of suffering. Emily Dickinson's poem, called Hope is the Thing with Feathers, puts it beautifully when she writes, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. The sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Hope is this beautiful gift that is deposited in one's soul, surviving to sing and enlighten other living creatures in even the worst of storms. Just after the horrors of the Second World War, the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1946, amazingly, went to a German pacifist, poet, writer, Hermann Hesse, previously banned by the Nazis for his dogged opposition to jingoism and National Socialism. He said, I began to understand that suffering and disappointments and melancholy are there not to vex us or cheapen us or deprive us of our dignity, but to mature and transfigure us. There is a biblical version of the same statement that recommends rejoicing, quote, in our afflictions, because we know that affliction produces endurance, endurance produces proven character, and proven character produces hope, Romans 5. Finding hope is one thing. Maintaining it takes intentionality and patience. For that, I'm inspired by the TV show Survivor. As a Generation X baby of the 1960s, I was prime material for loving this hit show when it began on May 31st, 2000. I hope I have some fellow Survivorholics. The show logo has an expression you might recall: outplay, outlast, outwit. Although that moniker is certainly uninspiring when searching for the secret to happiness and joy. It is fun, though, to watch contestants lie, cheat, steal, and construct puzzles. One thing you notice about Survivor episodes is the importance of fire. To cook with, light the night with, and burn on wooden torches that lead to a procession to a highly produced, but always entertaining, tribal council. There, with torches lighting the circle of truth they sit in, everybody votes to cast one of their own away. Quite literally, everything revolves around fire on the show. And it's from that image that I find some specific and practical inspiration in the form of words uttered by host Jeff Probst on the night every time a player is sent packing. In this game, fire represents life. When your fire's gone, so are you. It's an image harking back to ancient times when domestic fire was a constant presence in the homes and lives of families and communities. Even as recently as the 19th century, the presence of a permanent place of fire in the home was a constant that needed to be carefully managed, constantly kept alight, and fueled to survive the day and night. As a kid in the 1970s, I can remember my dad foolishly entrusting me with the family incinerator or fire in the backyard. We would, completely oblivious to the harm being spewed into the atmosphere, burn everything, anything, almost every night. Thankfully, various governments put an end to my climate changing ways and my fellow teenage fire starters in Western Sydney. Now, our hearths use electricity and switches to avoid the need for using and keeping a fire. And when we do introduce a fireplace into a home, it's not for cooking apple pie or roasting a pig over a pyramid of charcoal. The thing about a controlled domestic fire, the previously universal experience that we've largely forgotten in our time and age, and much like the flames at the centre of Survivor, is that they need 3 human acts to survive: fueling, watching, guarding. And as I describe those 3 practices next, I want to suggest you could see the practice of maintaining a fire as a metaphor for preserving hope in a challenged life. Chapter 7, Hope Lights, Despair Burns. The first one is fueling. Pyromaniacs, camping experts, and lovers of 90s band The Prodigy will agree. Every fire needs the right fuel and regular supplies of it. Wood, for example, at the very basic. Small sticks, in fact, to start with, or some other form of Bunnings packaged kindling. Then bigger amounts in the right order and at a pace that will maintain and build the flames. Just like fire, hope loves oxygen. One burning brighter with the breath of the wind, the other rising with the breath and presence of us, people. Like a campfire flame, hope thrives in the midst of loving, supporting communities. Like fire, hope loves company and burns brighter when nearer neighbouring flames. For any human being, but especially those challenged with illnesses like ours, we need specific and therapeutic fuels. We need external fuels, like expertise from medical professionals, doctors, specialists, psychologists, allied health. We need and thrive with peer support from this body, MS Plus peer support, telegroups. External fuel comes in the form of supports and services funded through the NDIS, other programs, again, MS Plus. But we also need some deeper burning, thicker logs that will last all night, the internal fuels. For you, that might look like building reserves of personal resilience, patience, forbearance, a sense of seeing beyond the current pains, and frustrations of living with this illness. Number 2, watching. No domestic contained fire survives the absence of attention. Simply put, without fuel, it dies. But without eyes on it, a fire can be dangerous or reckless, without aim and purpose other than to wander and ultimately diminish. Just as a fire needs attention, so does hope. Hope doesn't come to us at any point and linger of its own accord. We have to nurture what hope we have and be vigilant in watching for competing impulses. For me, practically speaking, I pulled right away from social media about 4 years ago. I use it and have accounts to keep in touch with family and to watch dog videos. But in my life, too much social media, for me, erodes the fuel of my fire, my hope. This is me talking, writing about me. Only me. Or maybe not. Could be you. Or not. Whatever. Your call. But if it were just me, and maybe you, watch yourself. Watch for meaningful connections with loved ones and friends, rather than the moments of curiosity from social media. Maybe don't look down at your phone so much. Maybe turn it over when watching Succession's final season. Watch each other, yourself. And the last one is guarding. Watching a fire is helpful, but guarding it is critical. Life will bring all manner of environmental, social, and external threats to challenge what flames we have burning. It can be a wind or rain, literally and figuratively. Storms of life that come to snuff out the flickering remains you have and drown the fuel. It's important we aim to keep the fire burning, maintaining hope with the vigour and attention we give to a campfire at beach with the grandkids. If it goes out, if we find ourselves without the warmth of hope, we will need external and artificial support to relight that. A flint can be a metaphor for mobility aids, prescription medications. Another person might be what is needed, someone who knows and loves you. Jewish people have a tradition that they cannot relight a fire on the Sabbath, reserved for their worship, not work. But they can go to the community fire and get a flame from that location to relight their own. In the same way, hope comes from reconnection with others, with community, with sharing one's experiences and lives with others. What you see here today is someone who constantly fuels, watches and guards his flame of hope, sometimes successfully. This version of me is better at doing that than the year 2000 me, better than the 2016 me inside an MRI machine, better than pandemic me. The Paul that has been away for a while is present in this room now. And he's saying to you, if there's hope for me, there's plenty more where that came from. Chapter 8, I really want to visit another country. Subtitle, Conclusion. On a personal note, I want to close by saying your inner convictions, worldview, deeply held values will often be the determiner of your source of and level of hope. For me, if you haven't worked it out by now or never read anything I write, you need to know, full disclosure, I have a deeply held inner spiritual conviction. I am a Christian. I don't mind saying it's what I believe. My favourite authors and characters are still men and women who wore cloaks, wore sandals, and followed a person by the name of Jesus, who was more than a person who wore a cloak and some sandals and ate fish. There is a story in the Bible of this person with nail marks in his hands, building a charcoal fire to cook some fish, making breakfast for his friends, until then despairing that there was no hope left in life. I'm not here to tell you what to think or to preach or to suggest that you believe anything. But if I'm asked to explain why I have hope or how to maintain it, I choose to cook over a fire that produces words, letters, phrases, sentences that I hope will inspire. And though I sometimes feel like MS is not worth the enduring and life is less than pleasurable in the midst of a bad day, I think of great writers who wielded words better than I can imagine, from wardrobes to campfires to MS conferences committed to help others to think the same. In the words of C.S. Lewis, I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that other country and help others to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a bit of time for questions, so I don't know if any of you have any questions for Paul. I've got one you might start with, and,
Sure.
that is, has writing itself been of positive value in terms of finding hope?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I never feel as hopeful and confident in life except when I'm writing. There's something in that makes me feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, even when it's not very good. So yes, it has helped me because I tend to return to it when I can, and be kind on myself when I can't. But putting words to express my feelings is particularly helpful, yeah.
The analogy I might use there is I focus on what I can do and don't bother about what I can't do. And I think Paul is saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Writing is something that he enjoys and therefore he gets benefit out of it. Sorry, there's a question at the back, Chris.
Oh yes, I had a question. Have you found that MS is affected with writing ability? By sometimes you write something and you
Yep.
think, oh God, did I really write that? And reread it.
Yep.
You might even like anything like that 5 years ago. You think this might be MS, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll just repeat the question for the video. So how has Paul's writing been influenced by MS? Has it been influenced by MS? That's the prime element of the question, Chris.
Yeah, terribly. There are times when I can't bring cohesive thoughts together. I mean, there's a reason why I'm on at 10 o'clock and not any later. Far better people than me will be on later that can handle that, but I tend to fade pretty quickly. My sleep patterns are crap as well, and so I've become a bit of a. I think of I love old Western films and all those gunslingers. They always had a couple of guns on their belt. I always keep a notepad and pen around, and no matter where I am, I can whip it out and write down something, and then later on I look at that and either throw it away or go, there's something there, and then I'll continue. And if I get the feeling that I've got more in me, I'll let it go and see where it will go. But yeah, it deeply affects what I do.
Tig.
Not a question, an observation.
Yep.
As someone who has not the skerrick of a writer's bone anywhere in my body,
Yep.
all I can say is, Paul, thank you. I just admire what you can do and your talent for doing it.
Oh, thank you, Tig. That's lovely.
And I'll just repeat that again for the video. Tig saying that he doesn't have a skerrick of a writer's bone in his body, and he admires what Paul does and thanks him for it.
I'll respond to that with a quick little story. I think we're okay for time, aren't we? Yeah.
Oh yes, yes.
It's funny how so many things in life will try and snuff that out, though. So I am a writer, and for a long time it was hard for me to acknowledge that, because a journalist doesn't like to call themselves a writer, essentially, because a journalist, that's my training, would tend to think, well, no, writers are either up themselves or I'll get there one day, I'll retire and write a book. So they're sort of in another category. When I was 15, grew up in Sydney, and I had to do work experience, and I went to the Parramatta Advertiser, and I think they were just pretty well old, frustrated journalists who'd washed out from newspapers in the centre of the city, equivalent of the age, and they'd ended up at this place. Anyway, I was given some pretty crappy jobs, like taking press releases from local councillors and rewriting them. And whatever I did didn't impress some old sub-editor. And he lit up his cigarette, I'll never forget it to this day, and he looked at me. It was the Friday that I was about to finish my 1 week of work experience. And he said, "You'll never make a writer. You're just no good at it." And I went home thinking about that the whole time, on the bus, getting home, walking home, and it could have crushed me, because I had this desire in me, like, I think I can write, I want to write, I do it all the time, I read about a book a day, what the heck? And I remember my dad said to me, "Don't forget where the source is. That guy's probably speaking out of some great sense of insecurity and potentially failure in his life, or what he perceives as. And out of his frustration, he's trying to put a cap on you." My dad's not the wisest person in the world. He's very loving, though. He was very wise in that moment. Yep. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I loved your use of fire and the analogy around fire and
Yep.
flame and keeping that alive like you do your hope. I was wondering whether you would like to share anything about others' roles in that, specifically
Yeah.
family and friends.
Yeah.
And whether you've found them to be people that have helped fuel your fire and
Yeah.
hope,
Yeah.
or whether you've had moments where maybe they've challenged that and
Yeah.
how you've coped.
Yeah.
The question was, first of all, complimenting Paul on his use of the analogy of fire, and then secondly, asking him about the involvement of other people, family and friends, and how they've helped to fuel the fire and keep the fire going.
Good fires are really only good fires because other people are helping you keep a watch on them. Like on Survivor, there's usually a number of people sitting around that fire every night, talking. But one person is not enough. Often they'll have to go away, go to the loo, whatever, get drinks, plot to kill someone else on the show. And I love that analogy that we need other people to also contribute. I know in my life, loved ones have been the key factor for me. I couldn't do what I do without them. But I also know that the greatest support I can be to them is to also champion that bit of fire that's in them. As they champion the fire that's in me, that's left in me, I champion the fire that I see in them. That Jewish analogy that I mentioned before about how you couldn't light your own fire on the Sabbath, but you could go to the community. it answers that beautifully, Sally, because what effectively that rule was is it forced them to get out of their home and mix with the rest of the community at least one day a week. So even if they were the world's deepest introverts, one day of the week, just so they can cook their meat and dinner, they'd have to connect with community. And I think now more than ever before, as the world is reconnecting and pace is increasing, we need to pause and think about how we can support each other and each other's fire even more. I hope that answers.
Well said, well said. I like that. Yes, yes.
I've got a question. Can I just, just wanted to ask something first. How long did you work as a journalist for?
Yep.
And are you working more now as an independent writer?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
So how long did you work for a journalist for, as a journalist?
Yep.
Just paraphrase the question again. How long did Paul work as a journalist? And talking about his experience as a journalist.
And then I've got another question.
Sure. The journalism, technically I've never stopped. In my mind, I'm still a journalist, even when I'm visiting my neurologist. Because I can't stop the skills. I find myself interviewing people. Like, it's very hard for me today to talk about myself. And I don't like doing it. But I treat it as like a mission, and therefore I'll complete it in the best way I can. But I did make a transition in about the 2010s from what I would call from journalist to freelance writer to then author. Now, I mean, if I'm asked, I write down my profession on tax forms as writer, but that's effectively the transition. Hopefully I'm not up myself. Yeah.
Okay, so my second question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but my second question is, what support did you get after your diagnosis from organisations where you were working as a journalist? Or
Yeah.
And the second question was, what support did Paul get from the organisations that he was working with when he was diagnosed?
I'm thinking about how to answer it.
That's why I asked, because I'm interested to know
Yeah.
what kind of support.
I tell you what,
understanding.
yeah, I'm not going to name any names or organisations or anything like that, but can I be really honest with you? Our organisations, our culture, our society just in general thinks they're pretty good and thinks they've made everything accessible and they've made workplaces better with standing desks, and we've got ramps now and lips and all that. To some extent, it's lip service, because when I needed the support, the biggest support I needed wasn't a ramp or a lift at work, although that's nice. The biggest support I needed, which I didn't get, was someone to believe that I was still Paul. They started to see the disability and the limitations and the costs before that. And so then I had to take care of myself. That's not a great answer, but it's a truthful one.
No, that's what I suspected.
Yeah.
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 That's what I thought your answer would be.
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've got a question, and first I would like to thank you, Nigel, for I think the best guest ever. And I'm coming here only for a few years as a participant, and after the COVID, I think Nigel, this is the best speak ever you can make it, because you give the people to talking like the hope, but not talking about the mess only on the MS, but on being a person as a person, not as a person with a mess or a person with disability or whatever. So really, thank you very much for having that. And I say only one joke, that nothing changed. The mic still don't work after a few years. All the time on the beginning, the microphone never worked. So I don't know why. But anyway, my question is, because I've got kind of inclination towards writing,
Yeah.
and probably maybe it's too late a little bit for me, but still I would like to write a book. And my question is, any advice where to start it.
Yeah.
So Martin's saying, first of all, what a fantastic speaker, and possibly one of the best speakers that we've had at our conferences. And secondly, Martin would like to write a book himself.
Yep.
And is asking Paul's advice. How do you start?
I'm a massive believer in, I'm like the anti-ageist person. I believe you can do anything at any age, in any capacity. I might not have thought that in my 20s. I thought I needed to burn bright in my 20s and I would just chill at some point in my life. But the way that I view life is I'm never going to retire from what I'm passionate about. And if I can make some money out of that, then that's great. I will do that. But the most important thing is if you have a spark of curiosity and imagination in the form of wanting to write, you absolutely should. Quick bit of technical advice. Whatever the idea is, think about the chapters. If you can come up with the titles of the chapters, you've got a book, even before you write them. Everything I've ever written, usually article, chapter, long form, book, I'll spend a lot of time on a blank piece of paper that becomes a contents page. And then I take each of those headings, even though they're not fantastic, whatever they are, and I'll take them and I'll write that at the top of another page. And if it's a 20 chapter book, I've got 21 pages, a contents page and 19 or whatever, 20 blank pages with nothing but a title on them. And then over the coming days, weeks, months, whenever I feel so urged, I'll pick up one of those and just start writing.
Yeah, that's actually awesome because this is like a project, that's it. Nothing. I've got a little bit more technical question because unfortunately my MS
Yep.
is affecting my hands.
Sure. Yep.
I can't write on the computer.
Yep.
And is it any way how I can make it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep.
I thought to hire the like ghostwriter or something like
Yep.
that, but I don't know.
There's great software.
Is that software?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's really, really good software. Dragon makes some fantastic software. Frankly, Apple-based products right at the moment, not an advertisement for Apple, but an advertisement for Apple, are fantastic at speech recognition directly into a word processor or a word-based file. Experiment with what you have before you buy anything. You've probably got some form of even primitive speech recognition already in your phone.
On the computer there is the
And if there is, experiment.
but I didn't expect that it's so good that can kind of.
It can. And I asked my support coordinator through NDIS, can I get support for what I want to do with my plan to get some speech recognition software? And she said, we'll ask. NDIS said yes, it absolutely can meet in your plans about connecting with society, etc. And so, because there are days where I can't write, my hands aren't great at times. So that's what I do. Yep.
So, do you mind if I ask which software, because I'm looking at software
Yeah.
at the moment, I've used Speechy and I've just downloaded Dragon.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't really find them that sophisticated.
No.
So for the video, questions about what sort of software is available to help you write.
This is where the MS is kicking in, and I can't remember the name of it. But you can come up to me later and I'll give you my email address and I'll find out. But it's something different than Dragon. There is a better one. But frankly, Amazon, through Alexa, but also Apple in particular, is doing some amazing stuff with speech recognition. So frankly, I find my phone now, my iPhone, the speech recognition just through using that is incredible. Yeah. And if you use Telegram, that actually will transcribe your voice messages for you.
So I think I'm going to wind it up
Sure.
there. We've had a fair number of questions. But Paul is here, hopefully for the most of the rest of the day. So if you want to talk to him about the technical issues of how to write and what sort of software, come and talk to Paul. We've got about half an hour for some morning tea. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you very much, Paul. It's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker this morning, Dr. Matthew Ligdemote, who is the consultant neurologist at Northern Health, where he runs the multiple sclerosis clinic. He looks much too young to me to be a neurologist in charge of a multiple sclerosis clinic. But then one always says that one should choose doctors that are a lot younger than you are, so I think that's a recommendation. He has a particular interest in neuroimmunology, which covers a range of conditions, including motor neurone as well as MS. But he's going to talk this morning about MS treatments and, I suppose, to some extent, where MS treatment is going, what sort of research is currently going on. So I'll ask you to welcome Matthew. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Is the microphone working? Cool. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. So I am, as Nigel has said, so I work in the MS clinic at the Northern Hospital. It's a pretty sort of, not beginner, but we only started it back in 2017.
If you use that gives the speaker up
so,
above.
Is that better? Good. So we only started it back in 2017. So compared to a lot of the other MS clinics in Melbourne, we're a little bit newer, but hopefully growing. In terms of my background, I am very much more a clinical neurologist. So a lot of this is my perspective as a clinical neurologist about some of the research things. So while I am a little bit removed from some of the research, hopefully I'm closer to what is much more relevant to everyone with MS in terms of what we can do to try and help things. So a lot of this is knowledge that many of you probably have, but MS is something that we've known about for a very long time. It was described initially nearly 200 years ago, and this was obviously well before MRI scans, by a relatively famous French neurologist who described a lot of different diseases. And if you look at that picture on the left there, that is sketches that people did after they cut up and had a look at brains under microscopes. And it looks very similar to what we see on the MRIs today. So the fortunate thing now is because we have MRIs, we can see what's going on in a lot more sort of detailed manners. It was realistically a very long time from when things were first described to when we had a better sort of understanding of what MS was. But that understanding is something that's always evolving. And certainly from my time as a medical student and junior doctor, the concept of what's going on underlying and causing MS keeps changing and keeps evolving, which is one of the challenges in terms of working out what we do to help things. So back then, and for a long time, well over 100 years, it was largely based on talking to people and examining people, which still is what we do in neurology, but we didn't have brain scans. And over the last sort of 50 or 60 years or so, we've had better ways and better options to diagnose it. And certainly in the more recent era of MRI, that sort of, as I'm sure you all know, is the main thing that helps us diagnose things. But now we use the McDonald's criteria, which the revisions that have happened over time are largely there so that we can hopefully diagnose MS as early as possible and start treatment as early as possible to try and minimize troubles in the future. And so the main sort of things to take from this is it's a little bit different how we diagnose relapsing remitting MS from primary progressive MS in particular. And it can be a little bit more tricky diagnosing particularly progressive MS when it's primary progressive MS, because there's a few other things that can trick us that we need to be careful with. So generally speaking, we diagnose this most importantly by talking to people and examining them, seeing how things are affecting people. making sure we're not missing something else or misdiagnosing another condition, and then obviously scans plus or minus a lumbar puncture. And broadly speaking, the way we diagnose it is proving that there is this what's called dissemination in time and space, which you may have heard us waffling on about in the clinic, which means we need to prove that there are spots that look like MS spots in different parts of the brain and spinal cord, and that there's a change over time. And the change over time is often new spots that pop up on scans, but can be changes in people's symptoms and the way MS is affecting them without necessarily having changes in the spots over time. This is a pretty typical scan, although this is quite a lot of MS spots that we see in the brain and the spinal cord. And when you have the MRIs with contrast, these are the pictures we get with that, where we see these spots, some spots are bright and some spots are not. So this is a scan that tells us a lot of information in terms of the MS spots that are there, but the fact that there are lesions that have come up at different points in time. I'm sure you're all well aware of the different categories in MS. However, I think it's just important to touch on this, that these are categories that have developed over a long period of time and have actually been something we've been using for decades, that don't necessarily easily fit in with how we conceptualize things now from an MS perspective. But a lot of the trials and the current trials and the treatment options are based on these categorizations, which I suspect over time may become a little bit more fuzzy. And so obviously relapsing remitting MS is the most common one we see when people first present with MS, where we get attacks, where people get more symptoms. It often gets better but may not get completely better, and over time, unfortunately, if we cannot prevent the attacks, disability will get worse. And this is probably the second most common option we see, possibility we see, is someone who has initial troubles with relapsing remitting disease, and then over time the pattern changes, and rather having up and downs, things just slowly and gradually get worse. And the third one is primary progressive MS, which unfortunately is something that slowly gets worse over time, and is probably the most challenging one to treat. This is largely based on symptoms and how people are affected by their MS. The scans that we do throughout the course of MS can change, but the tricky thing is that these categorizations are things that we use basically regardless of what the scans show. And so people might be getting worse in terms of how the MS is affecting them over time in either secondary progressive or primary progressive MS, but the scans can stay the same, which is something that really, from my perspective, it doesn't make sense. I'm sure, and you can all correct me if I'm wrong, that sitting in the clinic talking to us where we say, oh, the scans are fine, everything looks good, but then you're noticing things are getting worse, is a big disconnect. And this is where we, I think, struggle to, number one, explain why this is happening, but also it provides quite a challenge in terms of what we do to try and treat that. And it's a big part of MS that we haven't sort of solved in terms of treatment options yet. It may be that over time, what we see from a treatment perspective and what options we have might be more related to whether we're seeing the scans change over time, because that's, unfortunately at the moment, where we have the better options to try and treat things. And so this is probably going over what I've already said, that these are historically categorizations that have let us enter people into trials. The trouble with that is often then, in terms of the treatments and what we can offer in certain situations, it's largely based on what categories people may or may not fit into. The challenge is knowing whether that definitely correlates with what's going to help someone with MS who's sitting in front of me in clinic. So I suspect over time we might see some sort of change in how we think about this, which has already crept into how a lot of Australian neurologists treat MS, even though perhaps it doesn't perfectly fit in with how the trials were set up. These categorizations can help predict what happens in the future, but they're not the be-all and end-all, and certainly the most telling thing is how things change over time when we see people. Where I see these categorizations being less helpful is the fact it doesn't really account for what changes over time on the scans, and that the medicines that we have available for MS, they're very good at stopping new spots coming up on the whole, and we can be quite successful with that. What we're not good at is stopping that worsening of disability that happens without changes on the scans. You've probably all heard about the fact that there is some evidence for a couple of medicines in progressive MS, and that is in siponimod or Mayzent or ocrelizumab and Ocrevus. How we interpret those trials is a little bit tricky with respect to what's happening with scans. The reason for that is more, I went too quickly, is more because in those trials there were quite a few people with spots that were new on scans or contrast enhancing scans with the dye, and that's in a group who were progressive, either secondary progressive or primary progressive. Now, those two medicines are probably quite good at stopping those spots. And in the probably more common group in the Australian context who have progressive MS, the scans are often not changing over time despite disability changing. And it is a little bit more questionable whether there's going to be a lot of use for those medicines, unfortunately. From the historical perspective, treatments, unfortunately, we had well over 100 years where we couldn't find a treatment that can make a big or significant difference to what happens to MS over time. But since the early to mid-90s, we've unfortunately had many new options that have come up. In the realm of treating relapsing remitting MS or active inflammatory MS more than anything. Similar to a lot of neurological diseases, there's been a lot of other medications that may have come and gone and unfortunately been more disappointing in terms of the trials. But from the start of things in the 90s where we had interferons and then Copaxone and glatiramer acetate, each year or two we've generally had more and more new options pop up. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the different options, but if we look at the time course of things, generally speaking, options over time have led to us having more and more effective options and more different options that we can use to treat MS. Some of these have disappeared for various reasons. So teclistamab, which is here, came and went pretty quickly because of some unexpected side effects that came up. And for anyone who might have been on Tysabri right back in the early to mid-2000s, that we had to stop using that for a while, but fortunately have had ways of minimizing the risk that mean we can use it quite well and safely now. Moving to the sort of more recent times, Mayzent is the first medicine of all these medicines that's shown some benefit in secondary progressive MS. And there was also the small trial in ocrelizumab or Ocrevus that was potentially showing some benefit in primary progressive MS. As a general rule though, we can be quite good at treating relapsing remitting MS and the active inflammation of that, but we are still unfortunately struggling in terms of finding really good options to treat the progressive parts of MS. So I've said this is success to a degree because certainly it has revolutionized what we can do with MS, and speaking to my slightly more older colleagues who've been doing this for a while, they certainly see we've got more options to help hopefully prevent disability over time. Because ultimately my aim, and I'm sure most of my colleagues' aim in treating MS is as much as possible, we want to keep people's lives as normal as possible so they can live as free of troubles as possible, as normally as possible. Obviously, there is unfortunately always symptoms, but we have many more options to try and achieve that at the moment, but there's still a long way to go. And so I tend to think about what we can do and how successful we can be in MS. A lot of it at the moment is based on how active the inflammation parts of MS is, because that's really where all the treatments can work at the moment. The challenge is when we don't have that situation, what options do we have and what do we need to learn from here? When people have lots of active inflammation, we can be pretty successful at preventing new spots on the scans and preventing new attacks and preventing worsening of disability. However, there are still quite a lot of situations where we can't achieve the prevention of disability worsening, which is where we really need to, hopefully as a community, find more options. And this is, generally speaking, the realm of progressive MS is where we need good treatments. So in the Australian context, we don't have anything approved for primary progressive MS. That being said, there is certainly people out there who get treated with ocrelizumab in particular in this sort of situation, despite the fact it's a little bit against what the PBS would say. There is, however, evidence that that can be useful. That trial, like the trial for Mayzent below it for secondary progressive MS, did still have people who had what we would call active inflammation in the trial. So there was a reasonable proportion of patients who had developed over the period of the scan and period of the trial and before the trial, new spots that popped up on the scans. Siponimod is the secondary progressive MS option, or Mayzent, and that is approved in secondary progressive MS. And it's a similar medicine to fingolimod or Gilenya, which has been around for quite a while. And I think the major caveat to this is that there's a suspicion that we may have found some benefit in this trial because of the number of people who were getting new spots on the scans in the trial, and how easily we can apply that to someone who's not getting new spots on the scans is a little bit tricky. I think it's still something we certainly should be doing and are doing in terms of treatment options, but it is a little bit trickier. And I think the next step and the ongoing challenge in terms of what options we have is this group of people and group of patients with MS who are getting worse, the scans are staying the same, and what we can do about that. And it remains, unfortunately, frustratingly difficult, and I'm sure far more frustrating for everyone in the other side of the room to me in clinic. So one of the common things that I'm sure you know about is you come and see me in clinic and I say, the scans look good, no new spots. And then I get told, well, that's good, but why am I getting worse? And hopefully be a little bit better than saying, oh, that's a good question. And then I'll equivocate and mumble, and then patient will say, are you able to answer this question? And I think as a general, the short answer is it's actually a really difficult question to answer. And in terms of whether we can answer that question, I think the short answer is still that we are not sure. So there's usually debates in the big international MS conferences between fancy, very experienced pathologists who do a lot of research about exactly what's going on in progressive MS. And my feeling and reading of what is said is that it's something we don't know all the answers to. If we think about what we know about progressive MS, a lot of that is based on what we've done looking at people's brains under microscopes, unfortunately after they've died, so when things have been going for a very long time. We don't actually have a lot of evidence of looking at people's brains under the microscopes early in MS, which is a good thing because people don't tend to get really sick really early in MS. But a lot of what we know in MS in terms of what's actually going on in the brain is based on what we can gather from animal models where we try and make it look like MS, and a lot of sort of assumptions that are made. In terms of how I conceptualize this, a lot of the time I think it's important that we're honest and say that there's a lot we don't know. One way I think about what we need to learn and what hopefully we find out over time partially is related to how we think about some other conditions that are similar to MS but not the same. So one thing that can sometimes trick us and look like MS, but it's not actually MS, is this group of diseases called neuromyelitis optica, which some of you may or may not have come across. So these are historically, before about 15 years ago, these were considered as part of MS and were thought to be just really potentially more severe versions where people actually got sick and very disabled very quickly. Now, over time, we've been able to kind of split things off from MS because of the discovery of some antibodies. So these are blood tests that some of you may have had in the workup for MS, and these have allowed us to kind of look at this a bit differently. And when we look at this group of patients who've got MOG antibodies, these on neuromyelitis optica, NMO, or MOGAD, they actually behave quite differently to MS. And the big difference is, while they can have very bad relapses and attacks that lead to very significant disability that doesn't get better, if we can control the attacks and stop new spots coming up on the scans, people don't get disability progression. So it tends to behave quite differently. Whereas with MS, it's an unfortunately common thing that the scans can stay the same, but how MS affects people gets worse. With these conditions, if we can stop the attacks, things don't get worse. So there must be something different going on. And when we look at MS, we're very good at treating the active inflammation that we can see on scans. It obviously has to be something else going on beyond just inflammation potentially, or a different kind of inflammation that we're not treating. And so this concept, and there's a lot of work going on in the world about this, is this concept of progression independent of relapse activity, or PIRA. And this is something that happens in MS, but not these other relatively similar neuroimmunological problems. The big question going back from what we can do about it is, why is it happening? Because what we've seen is a lot of the treatments that work really well for MS attacks, and in MS when we're seeing new spots pop up on the scan, don't tend to make a difference to what happens in people who might be getting worse despite the fact the scans are staying the same and they're not having attacks. So going back a little bit, I think this is particularly relevant in the Australian context because of how we are quite fortunate in that we have lots of good options that we can use for a lot of people who have active MS. Then we have a group of people, unfortunately, who these treatments aren't going to work very well for. And the question is, why is this happening? There's a group of information that suggests maybe there's inflammation going on that we can't see on the standard MRI scan. So there are really detailed, powerful MRI scans that get used in research only, where they're a much bigger magnet that can potentially show little grumbling bits of inflammation that we can't see on a standard scan and won't ever see on a standard scan. Or is it due to another process? And we really don't fully know. And it may be that it's a little bit of both. One of the questions that often comes up in debates at some of the conferences is what's happening at the start of MS. And while it's reasonably accepted that the first parts of MS are probably inflammation, there is still a school of thought that there might be some other process that happens to start with, where the nerve cells might be dying without inflammation that then triggers the inflammation that happens afterwards. And this is the concept of the neuroinflammation, which is the inflammation part of MS, versus this other concept called neurodegeneration, or that is the loss and damage of brain cells that may happen without or independent of inflammation. I think this is one of the better kind of conceptualizations of what this is that I've seen. And this is potentially a little bit too convenient, but one way to think about it is if we've got, say, a balance on a scale, and we've got on the left neuroinflammation and on the right neurodegeneration. And there's an argument that both these problems might be happening in MS, and that the relative balance of how much you've got of each problem might determine which sort of category of MS you end up fitting in. Now, what we are very good at is treating what's on the left, which is the inflammation. And the medicines we have available work very well to stop the inflammation that we can see on scans that causes new attacks and new spots. What we have very little good options for is the part of the scale on the right, so the neurodegeneration. And this is true for a lot of other neurological diseases that I see in the clinic, where there is neurodegeneration without inflammation that there's been many, many trials of lots of different drugs in things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease that have not actually been able to show any difference. Now, I'd stress that MS is completely different to those conditions because we do have this active inflammation that we can treat. But potentially being stuck too much on considering inflammation as the be-all and end-all of MS might lead to us sort of missing ways of trying to treat things longer term in terms of the neurodegeneration side of things. If we look at how things are likely to happen in people who have active relapsing remitting MS that responds really well to treatment, or people who may have had relapsing remitting MS for many decades that has been under control with medicines, in terms of the balance of how much of each of these problems they have in their disease, they've probably got a lot of the neuroinflammation side of things, but not much neurodegeneration. And the converse of this, which is the trickier part of things, is someone who maybe starts off with primary progressive MS or ends up with secondary progressive MS, and this is particularly people who have worsening of disability without new spots on the scans or relapses. They may have more of this, inverted commas, neurodegeneration versus neuroinflammation. Now, this is something that is still largely a concept, and a lot more work needs to be done to look at this. But there are some sort of parts of, there's some evidence that is slowly coming out that sort of helps sort of maybe support this, and that there are some sort of biopsy evidence where we've looked at people's brains under a microscope who have progressive MS, and they have some abnormal proteins that look similar to some of the abnormal proteins that build up in the brains of people who have other neurodegenerative diseases. But it's actually a slightly different looking protein. So I've seen some evidence of people who have little clumps of something called amyloid. So amyloid is a thing that generally becomes abnormal and causes cell damage and death of nerve cells in things like Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's not Alzheimer's disease, it's a different looking protein, but it still looks a bit abnormal and might be a clue to the fact that there is something to this concept of two different things happening. Now, it's still possible that that's a secondary consequence of inflammation, but it remains possible that it's the other way around. And there's ongoing debates about what comes first, and it's very much a chicken or the egg situation that's very hard to answer. The underlying, and then if we think about the concept a bit more of neurodegeneration in progressive MS, we don't really understand that well. And I think we're going to see hopefully breakthroughs in what we can do with progressive MS if we can, number one, understand this process better, because that's where we're probably going to see more good options to treat things. What we know is that even the highly effective anti-inflammatory immunomodulatory treatments, such as like the ocrelizumab, the Tysabri, the alemtuzumab, trials in people who have progressive MS that are not necessarily getting attacks or new scans have been unfortunately disappointing. So this leaves us with what we can do about that. And so one question that the first step in finding medicines to help this situation is probably going to be getting a better understanding of exactly what's happening in the brain. And then if we can hopefully get a better idea about that, then there's also this parallel thing of whether there's something we can do to reverse the damage that's done or regrow myelin, which is obviously something that has been looked at for many years and decades as to whether we can find medicines that do that. I see one of the challenges with that is even if we find something that can be quite good at fixing damage that's happened, if we still don't know what's driving that to start with, we're always going to be chasing our tails. So it's hopefully we can find things that do both things. In terms of the future, there's a number of ongoing trials in progressive MS. They're still, in terms of the local Melbourne context, most of these are aimed at, again, things that can manipulate the immune system to hopefully stop the inflammation side of MS. And so where I work at the Austin a little bit, we're doing some progressive MS trials with fenbrutinib, which is a BTK inhibitor, and there's a bunch of different trials of those agents going on in the world. Hopefully we should get some answers quite soon, and I suspect, hopefully if the trials show they work, they'll become available for use. And a lot of the trials are in progressive MS, so they do show that the trials do show benefit. Hopefully that will add another option in the progressive MS realm. There's many other largely sort of basic science that is a bit before we get to what they do trialing on humans, looking at whether there's anything we can do to target remyelination. Unfortunately, over many decades still, we haven't got any options that we use in clinical practice. The fact that we're so good at treating active relapsing remitting MS means that the vast majority of the work that's going on internationally is looking at this progressive MS area, because that's where we're really a bit behind, and hopefully we can find more things into the future. So, summarizing that, I think what we hopefully see over time is a better understanding of what's happening in progressive MS, particularly with relapses, and whether there is two processes or whether it's all one process that's causing everything. I think answering these questions is probably hopefully going to happen quickly, which will give other options for treatment, but we're still a little while away from that. And then parallel to that, if we can solve that question, it will make it easier, I think, to hopefully answer the question of whether we can do things to reverse trouble damage that's there. But again, unfortunately, it's still a little while away. So all these things is talking about the future, and unfortunately, the future is not now. What other things do we do now that can help people, particularly with the parts of MS that the treatments that we have available from an inflammation point of view don't help? So I think this comes back to where obviously support networks that MS Society is very good with, but also through hopefully the clinics and the hospitals where people are managed, that very much a multidisciplinary approach is important and necessary, because unfortunately we can't prevent all the disability that comes with MS. And I think in terms of maintaining independence, maintaining people living life as well and normally as possible, making sure we're thinking about all these things is very important. And just quickly going over this stuff, so mobility management, important. This is often limited by the walking difficulties that come with MS, so working with physiotherapists, orthotics for treating any potential foot drop or ankle weakness is very important, and then trying to help people maintain as much activity as possible is important in various different ways. And this is all probably not news to everybody, as I'm sure you're well aware of all these things. Importantly, occupational therapy as well is important in terms of maintaining day-to-day function, upper limb troubles that might have, we might be able to find different equipment that can help people do day-to-day things is important, and obviously they can help guide home modifications, and they can often also give guidance on how to best try and continue to engage in work and other non-work life activities. All these things may or may not be super easy to access. Certainly we've got good setups if you get into the right place, but sometimes it is a tricky thing to try and arrange getting these things done. As an adjunct to the things we do for inflammation in the clinic, we have a lot of discussions often about the management of pain, which is really common. Unfortunately, it's difficult to treat, as I'm sure people who have pain from MS know very well. The medications can work to some extent, but don't always fix everything. It's probably more common we can take the edge off. Spasticity management is an important adjunct to managing mobility as well, because if people have a lot of stiffness and cramps and spasms from MS, that can affect walking too, and we can often manage that somewhat with things like baclofen, but then physiotherapy, stretching, and orthotics, as well as sometimes botulinum toxin, can be helpful. Continence, again, goes hand in hand with all these things that we can try and manage. There can be a mix of different things that are causing troubles, and we're better at treating some things than other things. Often if people have urinary urgency where you don't have a lot of warning before you need to go to the toilet, and the medications can be quite good at helping that, and there may be situations where Botox again into the bladder can be helpful. The slightly more tricky thing is urinary retention, where often we end up needing catheterization, but we try and link people in as much as possible with continence clinics to aid in the management of this. Mood is a common thing that can be difficult in the general population. It's probably a bit more common that anxiety and depression are troubling for people with MS. The way we manage it tends to be in line with how we manage it in people who don't have MS. In my experience, psychologists can be very useful. The challenge is finding a psychologist who knows about the different things that are going to be relevant to someone who's got a chronic neurological illness. So not all psychologists are necessarily going to be very good at that. It's not easy to find someone sometimes, and I often suggest before, if you need to see a psychologist, calling up the office and saying, do they have relevant experience seeing people with various different chronic illnesses? Because I think it does add a different sort of layer of complexity to how you're going to best be managed. And all of this hopefully can be helped by NDIS support, which unfortunately is only available to those under 65. So if you are getting close to 65, usually it's good to get on the program beforehand. And again, I'm sure this is not news to everybody. It still, I think, seems unfair to everybody that there's this arbitrary cutoff where if you're less than 65, you get a lot more financial support than over 65. And hopefully there's some change in that over time. How much time have I got? I just thought I'd finish with something that I'm sure we've all been dealing with for the last few years. People with MS just as likely to get COVID as the rest of us, but there's obviously the added worry and concern of medications that people might be on, and also the disability that can make people potentially more likely to get sick. Early in the pandemic, in most places around the world, people with MS actually were less likely to get COVID. That was almost entirely because you were likely a lot more careful than the rest of us. And we were fortunate in Australia that we were spared a lot of that really early significant dramas, despite the fact that we had a little bit more of that in Melbourne than the rest of the country. What we have seen now that we've had a few years looking at things is that it doesn't seem to increase the risk of MS attacks in the COVID era. There doesn't seem to be a correlation between someone getting a COVID infection and people having a relapse. However, it's really common that if you get COVID and you have a fever, symptoms will be worse for a period of time. There was a lot of worry early on about how much different MS medications will affect whether someone's going to get sicker with COVID. As a general rule, most treatments don't seem to have made people more at risk of getting really sick. The main outlier is ocrelizumab or Kesimpta or B-cell therapy, that there probably is, particularly with the earlier COVID variants, a little bit higher risk of getting more sick. In the Australian context though, because we kind of pushed back when we had the explosion of lots of cases until we had probably more benign variants of COVID, we haven't really seen people getting more unwell. It still can happen, but fortunately, because the variants are less problematic now, it tends to be less problematic. What overseas saw as well, particularly with regards to ocrelizumab, was that vaccinations probably actually didn't work that well, which we kind of knew, but the number of people on ocrelizumab who were getting really sick with COVID before vaccinations and after vaccinations was actually about the same. So it doesn't tell us it does absolutely nothing, but it probably fits with the fact that we've been worried that in particular B-cell therapy is most likely to sort of prevent vaccines working as well. Lastly, there's a likelihood that a lot of people with MS, particularly progressive MS or people on certain treatments, are going to be still eligible for the antiviral treatments. So there was a time where there was a couple of different antivirals available. Now the only one that actually works is Paxlovid. Generally speaking, if someone gets COVID with symptoms, with 5 days of symptoms, and they have MS and they're over 50, or they're over 30 and they're from Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander background, or they're over 18 on B-cell therapy or fingolimod, siponimod, or alemtuzumab, they qualify for these things. The challenge is how to get them, which is not always easy because you've got to find someone who can prescribe them. They do still work to minimise the risk of the infection becoming more severe and getting into hospital. An important note is that there's a bunch of different medications that potentially interact, and potentially medicines that a lot of people with MS are on. So probably the most common one is carbamazepine, which is often used for trigeminal neuralgia or a facial pain problem that would happen potentially with MS. You need to stop that when you're on antivirals. So anyone who's on that, you need to pause it if you're going to have antivirals. The challenge then is if the pain then gets a whole lot worse. And I've seen a few people who have not been advised to stop that. So it's just important to be mindful, whoever's prescribing it, make sure that they know what other medicines people are on. I think that is it. So.
And we've got a bit of time for questions. If I might start, can I ask you about the research into Epstein-Barr virus?
Yes.
And some comments about what's happening there?
So, obviously, EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, is something that has long been sort of tied up in MS pathogenesis and why people get MS. It's still a work in progress, and I think it has to be relevant, because if we look at the data we have, close to 100% of people who have MS will have been exposed to Epstein-Barr virus at some point in their life. The tricky thing is that like a big proportion of the population who don't have MS were also exposed. So it's probably not, it's not as simple as you get EBV or you have glandular fever when you're younger, you're guaranteed to get MS, and if we deal with that, we're going to stop MS. But it is probably, it's likely relevant to MS, I think. Taking a bit of a step back from that as well, what we see with those two conditions I talked about that are not MS, that we used to think were MS, that we've been able to kind of separate, it's still quite probable that MS is a whole bunch of different things and causes that we stick together as one thing. And it may, over time, we find ways of showing some people with MS EBV is more relevant, but certainly it's one of the things that we think is certainly relevant to potentially initial triggers that might drive MS, but there has to be other things going on in terms of susceptibilities.
Thank you. So, Tig will bring these round. We need two microphones, because one's for the loudspeakers and one's for the video. So you'll just have to shout, I'm afraid.
I will try shouting.
So, questions?
Speaking of triggers, I was interested to read an article.
Got to find a way round.
Sorry for the route march.
Speaking of triggers, I was interested to read an article recently suggesting a possible relationship between childhood trauma and the onset of MS in later life. And that, unfortunately, is something I can relate to. So I'd be interested if you have any observations about that, if you've had the opportunity to do such reading yourself.
I haven't seen that research in particular. By trauma, you mean, is it more emotional rather than physical trauma?
Yeah, emotional rather than physical.
Yeah. So I haven't read that. I think it'd be a good thing for me to read. The immune system is obviously affected by different stress in life. We probably know that, like, once people have MS, stress levels probably don't increase the risk of things going wrong or relapses. But potentially there's something going on with early childhood trauma that is having an effect on the programming of the immune system. I don't know, but I think that'll be interesting things to read, because obviously anything I think that helps increase our understanding of what's happening at the start and why things are happening is going to give us more options to treat things. But it'd be interesting things to read.
I'll come back next year so I can ask the question again. Thank you.
That's
I've got a question about, I like your idea about this, like this scale that you see the inflammation and neurodegenerative stuff.
It's not I borrowed it from someone who's
Yeah,
much
I
smarter
know,
than
I
me.
know.
But
I like that because I think because you kind of always focus on MRI and brain picture. It is kind of a little bit narrow-minded, in my opinion. Sorry,
yeah.
because
No, I agree.
You have to look on the bigger picture. Everybody are different, but in general, we different but the same, but in some way very similar. Yes, we are human being made by some stuff which we eating, for example. And I'm wondering if it's something, and like she mentioned about the stress as well, this is another part of the stuff. So like looking on the big picture of person who got MS, that is, we are all the spots in the brain, but maybe this is, especially with recovery from MS a little bit, if possible, that I use the fire comparison again, that you've got the house which burn, which is you are very good in taking down inflammation, like good firefighter, you know, put a lot of water, boom, the fire is gone, like inflammation is gone. We are getting, getting still worse. Yeah, why are we getting still worse? Because when you see house burn down, is a lot of rubbish and a lot of crap there, and it takes a long time to rebuild if you want to rebuild it. It's probably the same with our body. If you got the attack of MS, you've got a lot of inflammation you put down, but the recovery is not that fast. We're always expecting, we take a pill, boom, we will be healthy. But maybe this is not the way actually, and we have to recover different way and take probably long time to recover, and that's what we don't like it, because it takes long time, a lot of money, and the doctors and nobody like it. So, but I'm wondering if there is a kind of trend between the neurologist community to look on the bigger picture and look and suggest a little bit more than only pills, like lifestyle changes, food changes, whatever, meditation stuff, a little bit like more, I know this is maybe kind of overrated, very like holistic approach a little bit, yeah?
So I don't think it's overrated. I think it's important. I think the challenge is we don't there hasn't been the work done to do trials and studies to try and prove what sort of things are really useful and what things are not. I think that the fortunate things are most of those approaches are not ever going to be dangerous. And I think the holistic approach is absolutely important, particularly given the limitations of what we can do with the pills and things like that. What we don't know is in terms of what I can advise, it can be quite difficult, because we can't sort of look at a study that says this certain modification of food and diet will help things. And I think hopefully we get more information about those kind of things that will hopefully be an adjunct to other treatments. And certainly that holistic approach I think is important if we again take that step back to look at why things are getting worse, that we don't have all the answers to that. So us to say certain things are not going to be helpful when we just don't know is probably quite arrogant of us. But and certainly I think it is common that we can be a little bit narrow-minded in terms of what we can suggest, but a lot of that is driven by the fact we don't know we don't have all the answers about many of these other sort of options.
Don't be afraid to ask the question.
No, I think it's an important thing, and these are questions that need to be asked and important.
Hi, thank you for speaking today. I've had MS for 25 years, and for 21 of those years I've been on Avonex and interferon, and recently the government decided in all their might to take it off the market, which I'm gutted about because it's done me well for so long. And in 2 weeks I'll be seeing my neurologist to discuss my alternatives. So I thought I'd ask you, being a neurologist yourself, I know you don't know me from a bar of soap, but I don't care. I do have rheumatoid arthritis, so I've been researching myself before I see him, and I've had a look, and Kesimpta has been brought to my attention under discussion with my rheumatologist as well, and he said to discuss that with my neurologist as well, and perhaps that might be an alternative. I'd like to know what your advice would be.
As you're well aware of, like, some people have multiple different autoimmune problems.
Correct.
There's a medicine called rituximab, which is also a B-cell suppressive therapy. So Kesimpta, Ocrevus, and rituximab all basically stop how many of these B cells, which is part of the immune system, are floating around in your blood. Rituximab is a good and very effective treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. Often for rheumatoid arthritis, I think you have to go through a bunch of other treatments before and fail those before they use rituximab. And the doses are different, but it kind of makes sense as an option. So obviously, as I said, I don't know you, and I think it's important to speak to your neurologist, but it may be a sort of killing two birds with one stone kind of thing. And I would suggest, in situations that I come across like this, I always make sure I have a chat to the rheumatologist, and I think it's a good thing that we talk together and we can come up with a sort of consensus plan. Because it might be that, so again, I don't know you and your MS, but Kesimpta is a pretty big step up in effectiveness compared to something like Avonex.
Yes.
It will work, almost certainly, but it has there's a few potential more sort of downsides to consider.
Yep.
But if it means you can potentially be on less other treatments for the rheumatoid, it might be a relevant
to get
thing.
rid of one drug, just basically have one and not two sort of thing.
It's worth considering, but it's just make sure you're asking about all the potential up and downsides.
Oh, you can guarantee that. I will. Yeah. Thank you.
You were talking about the early history of development or knowledge of MS. I'd read somewhere that one of the early methods of diagnosis was putting people in a hot bath and seeing if the symptoms got worse.
Yep.
Have you heard of that? And is that correct?
I haven't heard of that, but it makes perfect sense. As I'm sure everyone's aware of, there's this thing called UTOF. It's called UTOF phenomena, which I wonder whether this was something that was a thing developed by this person called UTOF, and that is that if the body temperature goes up, the MS problems get worse. And that happens, I'm probably sounding like a broken record and you all know the answer to this, but the way nerve signals travel along with myelin, so myelin makes the nerve signals travel quicker. When myelin is lost, the nerve signals travel a bit slower. Now, if there's been a little bit of damage that causes a problem, then it gets better, but the scarring is still there. The nerve signals are still traveling slower, but probably because of the way the brain has worked to get around things, things get better. If you increase someone's body temperature, and this applies to people with MS or without MS, if you increase the body temperature enough, those nerve signals start to travel slower. Now, for someone without MS, they have to probably have a temperature that's so high they're at risk of dying from the high temperature, for the nerve signals to really slow enough for their nerves to stop working properly. But if you've got MS, the body temperature may only have to go up a little bit before you start to notice the slowing that is normal. So I suspect it's just one of those things that you can show that there must be something increasing or reducing the nerve signal speed that you notice when we increase the body temperature a little bit.
I can tell you that I try on myself, it's working.
Yeah.
When I was, I tried it when I started symptoms, and I was like first year after diagnosis, I read the stuff about this hot tub, and I thought, what the heck, I'm gonna try it. And far out. I went in, I couldn't get out. Unbelievable. It is something, it's really working. Maybe not for everybody, but
for a lot of people, not. Yeah. So the important thing to know about that as well is you're not doing yourself more damage. So it's not more nerve injury. It's not making any of the spots worse. it's always going to be just a momentary feeling of it being worse. So don't worry, like if you're doing that or exercising and your body temperature goes up and you feel worse, it's not doing you any harm. So it doesn't mean you need to avoid those things as long as you realize you just have to rest and it'll get better.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation today. I just wanted to give a reflection and just say that it's so refreshing to hear about research into progressive MS. It's really wonderful to hear about it. And not only that, it's actually more wonderful to hear a neurologist talk about how difficult those conversations are with patients. I think everybody that has had an MRI that has been the same as the last one, and the neurologist says, yippee, this is fantastic, has a moment where they really think, oh, am I allowed to say that I don't feel as good as I did 6 months ago or a year ago? Am I making this up? Is somebody going to be questioning my honest appraisal of my body when the neurologist seems so happy that I'm stable when maybe I'm not? So I just want to thank you so much for being a clinician that is willing to have the difficult conversations. The slide you put up about you and the patient talking about it, a lot of people have experienced that. And they often experience the neurologist just remaining silent at the end. So a huge thank you to you for saying that it's really difficult and for allowing yourself to be a bit vulnerable in that moment. Patients really appreciate it.
We're not... We don't tend to be very good at saying we don't know, but there's so much...
Thank you when you do.
There's so much that we don't know. And I think for most doctors, the more they go through their career, the more they realize how little we know. And there is that big disconnect that no one really understands. And I would say you should be pushing us on that and telling us, look, I feel worse. And I think it's an important thing to know because there might be other things going on that we can then think about looking at that are not MS related that are causing things to be worse, and we should be thinking about that as well.
I just have also one other question from the audience about your comments on stem cell therapy generally, but also about progressive MS as well.
Yep. So the stem cell therapy, so firstly, I think we think about it, it needs to be thought about as it's another one of the immune system modifying treatments. So there is stem cell research in some conditions where they're actually looking at using stem cells to regrow things. Certainly in Parkinson's disease, people have tried putting brain stem cells into the brain to regrow some of the things that were not working, including a trial that was done in Melbourne at Royal Melbourne. Stem cell treatment in MS is not that, it's the immune system that we're working on, and it's basically, I'm sure these are things that everyone knows as well, but what it is we wipe out the immune system and then we re-inject into the patient the immune system stem cells, which then go into the bone marrow and regrow the immune system. And when it regrows, it's the person's own immune system still. So there is, in some kind of blood cancers, they actually use other people's stem cells, which is another level of risk above that. But as the immune system regrows, it's kind of, the concept is that it's reset to not be less likely to cause the autoimmune thing. So we know it's a highly effective treatment in active or relapsing remitting MS. The evidence for it being useful in progressive MS isn't there. And so I suspect a lot of that may be because it's not, there is something going on that is not inflammation driven. And so that if we fix what the immune system's doing, we might not be doing anything to that type of aspect of progressive MS. So I know people, that there are people who may have some progressive elements to their MS, but still a lot of active inflammation. So if someone's getting lots of new spots on the scans or contrast enhancing spots and other treatments are not working, even if they've had some progressive disability, that it may be a treatment that works then. But I think particularly in the group of patients who have things worsening without the scans worsening, we don't have the evidence that says it's going to work, which is unfortunate. But the discussions I have with patients in that situation is, look, it's a highly effective, powerful treatment in the right circumstance, but if you don't have active inflammation in inverted commas to treat, it's treating with stem cells is going to open you up to all the potential life-threatening side effects, which are there. That's not a super high risk, but it's certainly another level up from all the other MS treatments without really any realistic idea that it's going to help things.
It's in regards to stem cell. I've constantly been mentioned about doing stem cell therapy overseas. Now, I just understand, look, I don't know about this treatment, but I know I have heard of a lot of people go overseas for this treatment.
Yep.
I just wondered, how safe is it?
So firstly, stem cell treatment is something that is available in Melbourne. But no, yeah, so that's right. So the difference is, like, there are pretty sort of strict rules that are designed to make it available to those people that we know it's going to work for.
Not for secondary progressive?
Yeah, so that's the challenge. So yeah, so without the active inflammation on the scans, it's not things that we know it works for. And I think coming back, the evidence we have for it, it's not particularly, it's not great in secondary progressive MS. Now, then safety-wise, like, the two places people usually go are Mexico and Russia. Russia's presumably off the table at the moment.
I'm just wondering, do they know what they're given?
So we assume it's, like, it being given by doctors, we have to assume it's the right thing, and generally the chemotherapy drugs they're using to start with are similar ones that what you get everywhere. So it's all chemotherapy. So it's essentially the same kind of chemotherapy they use in blood cancers to wipe out the immune system. And this is where the risk comes from. So people have died having stem cell transplants in MS. People have died in trials that have been done as well, so even in pretty strict situations. And this is why I tend to be, in my practice, when I tend to be pretty, I don't make it sound worse than it is, but I think we have to be honest about where we're coming from when we're saying, look, we don't think it's a good idea. It effectively, in someone who doesn't fit those sort of inflammation criteria that we know it works for, the stem cell treatment then is going to open up to the potentially not insignificant risks. And so I would say, so my discussions in clinic around this, I tell people as much information as we know. Sometimes people decide to go and do it despite what we say, which...
So you've had patients that have said, no, I'm going ahead with it.
Yep. So we still very happy to keep seeing people when they come back is the number one thing. So it's never, it ultimately has to be the person, it's not my body, it's not my life, but I can give as much information as I can in terms of what I know and why I'm making my recommendation. But I would be very worried if people weren't continuing to see people when they came back just because they didn't do what they were told, which is unfair. The tricky thing, no. So I actually haven't had anyone with progressive MS go overseas. It was people who actually it was going to work for, but we had other options that were probably safer that we could use here, and they didn't fit the criteria to have it in Australia. So it's there's the two situations that could come up in terms of people wanting stem cell treatment is someone who has relapsing remitting MS, but for various reasons they don't want to have the medications we have available here. And that means you're not going to fit the criteria for how we can treat people with it in Melbourne, or it's people with progressive MS. So it's a slightly different conversation because it's probably going to work, but is the risk benefit the same? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
But I would encourage you to speak to your neurologists, and if they dismiss it and are not talking enough, keep asking them and annoy them.
It is incredibly frustrating that is such a dearth of data on progressive MS? Why? Why is it that there is not enough research being done in the
progressive?
Yep. So you mentioned, so there is a dearth of data in progressive MS. I think a lot of that is probably partially related to the fact that historically it's been easier to find medicines that can fix the inflammation immune system part of things. And if we look at MS, there was many decades of different people looking into MS treatments for relapsing remitting MS, and it was constant failures. And I've spoken to my, again, more senior colleagues who were around doing research in the 1980s and 1990s, and these are fairly prominent neurologists who would advise young neurologists at the time to never go into MS research because it's a dead end, nothing ever works, it's a career failure. And so this is 80s and 90s. And so there was a pretty, not nihilistic, but like an assumption that nothing's ever going to be found, nothing's ever going to be working. And this is when we had nothing to treat people with relapsing remitting MS. Now, you go forward 30 years from then to now, where we have all these very effective treatments. So what that's proven that idea was completely wrong, and that it's incredibly frustrating, I'm sure far more frustrating for people in your situation, the lack of, number one, knowledge and the lack of options for treating progressive MS. I think that history of the fact that people didn't listen to that, to the nihilism and wanted to keep trying and kept looking at things has led to the position we're in now from a relapsing remitting MS perspective. And the hope would be that we find the same thing. Like, so there is I think there's that feeling of, look, we still keep trying and nothing's working. We still can't, we haven't found this magic thing that can make a massive difference. It's very easy to feel that that's how it's going to be forever. But hopefully we see a thing that's similar to what's happened in relapsing remitting MS, and that with perseverance over time, we find better options. And I think, like, we look at a lot of the work that's going on is really in this field of progressive MS, because that's where we don't know enough, we haven't solved things. So I know there's a dearth of options and knowledge. Part of that is because it's a really hard thing to work out, but there's a lot of people working on it. I think a lot of the work going on to try and find things that can help people is in this field internationally. If we look at other neurological diseases that are in this inverted commas neurodegenerative realm, unfortunately it's very similar to progressive MS in that we've been looking for things for a long time and we still can't find it. And the parallels between MS and those conditions is that there still isn't we still don't know everything about why the diseases happen. So it's unfortunately common amongst a bunch of different neurological illnesses that we don't know enough. And it's easy for me to say that and talk about that because I'm not sitting in your shoes, but there's a lot of work going on.
We'll just take one more question. I think we've had a pretty good round of questions. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. That was excellent. I just wanted to ask about the research around around when the scars or the myelin happens, and what sort of research is there now going on about the brain looking for other paths to use, and what can we do to sort of facilitate that, our brain making pathways?
Yeah.
And to send messages
So it's
to other parts of our
really
bodies.
good question. So that's probably the tricky thing with all MS, relapse remitting or progressive, is once the scar is there, and it doesn't go away. And even like if we go back to like the scans I put up at the start with a brain that was full of inflammation, you can have a scan that looks like that but have almost no symptoms. But then you can have a scan that only shows a couple of little spots and things are really bad. the concept, I think what you're getting at is the concept of plasticity, or is what it is, and this is common to a bunch of different neurological conditions. We see this in stroke as well, in that the brain can certainly recover, and it's not usually the recovery of the area that's been damaged, it's the fact that the brain works out ways around the damage. There is always sort of research going on in terms of trying to work out the best ways to sort of maximize that recovery process. It's still probably a little bit unpredictable in terms of how I see things, and you can have two spots that look the same that have a completely different outcome down the line. I think as things stand at the moment, the best option is to make sure you've got, hopefully getting good access to the physiotherapy and the recovery rehab process from that perspective after attacks. There unfortunately aren't sort of other options beyond making sure you've got good neurophysiotherapists to sort of guide that, or maximize the plasticity process of how the brain gets around the damage that's there. So it's certainly research going on in that realm. I don't know unfortunately all the little details about what potential options are coming, but I think what we know at the moment is it's very much working with a good neuro rehab physio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. We've had a very good presentation and a lot of opportunity for questions, so I ask you to join with me to thank Matt for it. And I'm sure he's going to hang around for a little while if any of you want to ask more personal questions. And
thank you very much.
Token of our thanks. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon. Our third speaker today, Sally Shaw, is somebody who many of you will have heard speak before. Sally is a very easy speaker to listen to, and somebody who manages to put quite complex relationship issues in an understandable form.
Thanks.
She's a Melbourne-based psychologist, heads up an organisation called Focused Health Psychology, which is a group which specialises in neurological conditions like MS. And Sally says that one of the things she seeks to do in life is looking for opportunities to increase the wider community's knowledge of positive psychology and its application to real life. So I invite you to welcome Sally, who's going to talk about, in these days when it becomes increasingly difficult to get hold of a specialist, what you can do to help yourself or what you can do to help someone else who has MS. Sally, and welcome.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you. Would you like me to use that one? Do you want me to use that one? Yes. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I would like to start today by thanking Nigel very much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here, and how good were the first two speakers? So no pressure at all on me, but I'm hoping that, and also the one after lunch. So let's all acknowledge that this is the hardest gig because everyone wants a nap, and now our tummies are full. So I'm going to try and keep you with me, but if you're not off, I also understand. I won't point you out. Maybe, we'll see. So just be careful. I appreciated Nigel giving me some direction about what I might be might be of value for me to talk to you about today. And the topic given was helping yourself or someone close to you. And I took it very much from the perspective of psychological and mental health, which I think we can all do a little bit better in. And it's sometimes a really good idea to discuss this concept in real terms rather than what I casually refer to as breakfast television terms. You know, the types of stuff that we hear about on television all the time, the things that we should be doing to make this better for ourselves. I'm hoping today that you will leave with a couple of little things that you can actually go home and try in order to increase the level of your mental health and well-being. So, as a further introduction, I do work with a couple of other psychologists, and you may have heard of them also, Siona Alalio and Liel Bridgeford. They're fabulous, fabulous psychologists, and they are equally as passionate as me in working in this space. We are slowly becoming more and more comfortable talking about ourselves as psychologists with lived experience of either MS or disability, and we see the space growing, which is really fantastic. This idea that society is getting on board with the fact that people with lived experience of disabilities or neurological conditions can also offer great value in professional spaces. So the three of us have that lived experience, and we find that it's really important to find other professionals who might get that extra layer of understanding. We focus on people with MS, other chronic neurological disabilities, and people with broader disabilities. As Liel speaks, she's a fierce advocate in the world of disability. She spoke to a group of MS nurses recently about her experience being a disabled person, and one of the very brave MS nurses, I thought, said to Liel, in front of all the other MS nurses, "Could you tell me, should I be referring to my clients as people with disabilities, or should I be talking about them as disabled people?" And Liel, not skipping a beat, said, "We should probably ask them what they would like you to refer to them as." But she said, "But if you're talking about me, I like to be called a disabled person," which surprised me, because I've spent all my professional years saying person before disability, person with disability. And Liel said, "I am disabled by this society, and that's why I refer to myself as a disabled person." And I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go home and process that, because I think that's fantastic, and I think we feel it coming. Like, we are people, we are so much more than disability, but we are also, in some instances, people with disabilities. And why are we hiding it? Why are we trying to be something we're not when there is nothing wrong with this? So she is much younger than me, but also an inspiration, and she teaches me a lot. As psychologists, we do work from the positive psychology framework. Sounds a bit, but it's a really nice framework. It doesn't say just smile, you'll be fine. It talks about how it's really important to look at the way we think about things and how that can impact on our experiences. We use CBT commonly, although it's not great for everyone. We also use ACT therapy, which I personally think is a great therapy when we're working with people with MS and other conditions, because it talks a lot about accepting what's out of your control. And what do we know when we're diagnosed with MS? Man, that uncertainty and that sense of not having control over something is pervasive. So ACT therapy really helps us work with clients to look at ways of living a life in accordance with our values, in accordance with our strengths, and just living large, while also being cognizant of the fact that we're dealing with challenges. It's a little bit about how we work. Today, the overview is a quick look at what do we mean by mental illness and what do we mean by mental health. And these two things are very different, and it's important for us to know the difference, I think, when we are trying to attend to our own levels of mental health. We're going to be looking at some of the symptoms of poor mental health in yourself or in someone close to you. So I know we've got lots of people here today that are people with MS or disabilities or a variety of things going on, and we've got also lots of family members and carers. And as both parties, we might also know of other people that could use a bit of assistance sometimes. So how do we support them as well? What are we going to do about it in terms of increasing our own levels of mental health? I want to touch on this concept of psychological resilience. A lot of these terms are terms that kind of talk about the same thing. So I want to really narrow in on what we mean. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to have a look at helpful contacts. Please do raise your hand or just yell at me if you've got a question during this, because I can just keep talking. And it's okay for you to interrupt and we can clarify something. Or if you've got a question or a comment, if you hear me talk about something that you have an experience in and you want to share, everybody would love to hear it, because it's really important for, like, half of the benefit of a day like today, I'm sure Nigel plans the breaks accordingly, is for us to be able to talk to each other and you know, get a little bit of experience from this person or share a bit of a story over here. It's such an important part of a day like today. So what is mental illness? So this is mental illness. These are diagnosable conditions that affect thinking, feeling, mood or behaviour, or a combination of these. Diagnosable. They're complex. Most of the time they're complex mental health challenges over a sustained period of time. You might know a few of them. These are the most common, and they include major depressive disorder. We often call it clinical depression. It's the same thing. Generalised anxiety disorder, we call that anxiety. And panic, social anxieties, phobia-related disorders, these are the most common mental illnesses. These are diagnosable. They're complex and they present symptoms that are very distressing over a sustained period of time. When we look at the people with MS, we're about 3 times more common. It's 3 times more common for people with MS to experience depression and anxiety, and we know that 50%, it's higher than that, of people with MS will experience clinically diagnosable anxiety or depression at some point in their life. So it's a big deal, and we need to be informed about mental health and our role in maybe preventing mental illness, because we're at greater risk. Having a mental illness is not the same as having a bad day with symptoms of depression or worry, anxiety. So I don't want to say that having a day where you have symptoms of depression, when you're feeling really low or highly anxious, I don't want to say that's fine, that's nothing. That's bad, but it's very different to having a mental illness. So a lot of us experience symptoms of depression or anxiety from time to time. They're symptoms of depression and anxiety, but you need a lot of those symptoms over a sustained period of time to give you the label of mental illness. So symptoms of these things are hopefully mostly manageable, but we need to be aware of what they look like so that we can have a little red flag, so we can be aware of a change in us, a change of mood or a variety of other symptoms that we'll get to, so that we can attend to it, and so we can maybe put into place some preventative strategies so that we don't have too many bad days. Does all of that make sense? Yeah. Am I telling you everything you already know? Yeah. Are you awake? This is important. Okay. What is mental health? This is quite different. Mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. So if you do not have a clinical diagnosis of depression or anxiety, that doesn't just give you an automatic tick in they're really mentally healthy. It doesn't. So we have mental illness, you have it or you don't. Mental health, everybody has a level of mental health. It might be a really poor level of mental health, but you still have it. You have a measure of mental health. You might have an amazing, robust level of mental health, brilliant, but you're somewhere there on the continuum, regardless of whether you have a mental illness or not. So that sounds a bit weird, but you can have a mental illness and you still have a level of mental health. I just said that bit. What goes into making up our mental health? A few different measures of well-being: emotional, psychological, and social. And at this point, I expect everyone to start nodding off because they're terms that we like. We all know that these 3 terms, but what I'm hoping to do today is to break these terms down a little bit to get some action involved in each of these categories so that we can build our overall level of mental health. And physical well-being, let's not forget that one. So physical well-being, of course, goes into our measures of mental health. And that's a problem sometimes. If we're not in a great state of physical well-being, that will have a massive impact on our mental health. Of course it will. It's not the sole constituent, but it's a big impact. Mental health and your level of mental health is key to your positive relationships and your ability to function at a high level or any level. We all know this. This is not new, but it's important because when we realise what a dramatic impact it has on our positive relationships, I mean, for a lot of people, that's everything. If you have good relationships, you're doing all right. If your relationships are waning, if they're not great, you feel that. You know how much that has an impact on you. And the World Health Organization, I'm stepping back so I can read it because now I wear glasses, but I refuse to put them on. When I step back here, the World Health Organization nailed it, I thought, interestingly, in a paper on climate change. But they said a state of well-being, mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realises his or her own abilities. So you know your skills, you know what you can do, you know what you're good at. They can cope with the normal stresses of life. That's a fair measure of well-being, mental health. They can work productively and fruitfully. Right. Picture those times, or maybe there are times in your life now or previously where you're working productively, you're achieving, you're producing things. It gives you a sense of well-being, and they're able to make a contribution to his or her community. When you contribute to your community, it does wonders for your mental health. So the World Health Organization has nailed it there. Great. Now we just need to break it down to know how can we actually use that to better develop our mental health. But before we do that, is your mental health stable? No. I don't know. I won't make you put your hand up, but if you feel like you've had stable mental health your entire life, I'd love you to come and share that little secret with me. We can bottle it, we'll make a fortune. But really, we've got to be honest and realise that mental health is not stable. And to be honest, I actually think that's by design. We're all human beings. We are designed to experience all the emotions. We are on a planet living a life with all the challenges. Nobody lives a life free of challenges that are not hurtful or saddening or difficult or grief-filled. So we're going to go through the roller coaster of emotions. We're designed to do that. That's normal. It's not comfortable, but it's normal. And we need to make sure that we can get through those hard times because they're coming. MS related or not, they are coming. So we need to, kind of arm ourselves. Many variables can contribute to our level of mental health, of course, and they change over time. So external ones, the ones that we can think about in the context of MS, you have a relapse, that's not on you, that happens. It's something that happens to you. Maybe you have a financial stress going on, maybe a housing stress or a relationship breakdown, or somebody you love isn't well. All of these things are out of your control and they will all impact on your mental health. They can have a lesser impact on your mental health if you have really done the work and you've got a few factors going on to keep you strong, but they might just bring you down because things happen and it's tough. There's also a lot of internal variables that contribute to your well-being as well. And so they include the way we think about the world. They include our personality. They include the behaviours we choose to engage in. Are we choosing those great, positive coping strategies? Or are we choosing the maladaptive ones, like I'll just have another glass of wine and I'll stop thinking about all that stress that's going on in my life? There are coping strategies available to us. That doesn't necessarily mean they're great. Which ones are we choosing? We need to remember that our mental health is a continuum. So it has a huge impact on our functioning, whether we have low levels of mental health or whether we have high levels of mental health, and we're always a bit fluid. Most of us are a little bit fluid between where we sit on that continuum. So what are the symptoms of poor mental health? Let's have a look. And just reminding people that we are not in bed, we are waking up. Here we go. Significant tiredness. I'll try and sound more like, not like one of those apps. And getting snoozy. Significant tiredness, lacking energy. I'm trying to sound upbeat. Are you any of these things right now? Do you have problems sleeping? Do you have some confused thinking going on? Do you have a reduced ability to concentrate? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Have you noticed some sex drive changes? Now these are, interestingly, symptoms to give us little red flags about poor mental health. Can anybody think what else symptoms they could be of? Yeah.
Sorry, not about the other symptoms, but that symptoms actually. Because we've got MS, and MS causing all the symptoms.
Correct. You got it in one.
Nothing with our mental health.
Correct.
Because that's a symptom of MS actually.
Correct. And this is why I put them in column A. When your doctor says, I wonder if this person's depressed, you're having trouble sleeping, are you feeling a bit tired for no good reason? If you ever go to your GP and you fill in a mental health care plan, they would have asked you to fill in the K10. The K10 is a little form screening tool. Let's see if this person has some psychological distress. The first question, maybe the second question, do you ever feel tired for no good reason? And so anybody that has MS pauses and says, hang on a second, how do I answer this? I know the doctor's screening for depression, so do I answer it from a mood point of view or just the fact that I'm fatigued all the time? And there is a good reason, but there's no good reason. So here is that first column. These are red flags for your mood and your mental health. There we go, you've got MS. This is such a complex area. And it means that a lot of people with MS, it means that they are Symptoms of depression, anxiety, their mental health is not often really examined by the health professionals because the health professionals understandably say that's their MS symptoms. Or sometimes the reverse. If you're in the neurologist's office and you might have a little tear because you're facing a challenge and they go, oh, you're depressed, here's the number to the psychologist. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but it's just really difficult. So let's have a look at the other symptoms that might tell us that your mental health is suffering a little. I kind of group them. Excessive fears or worries. That makes sense? If you're really feeling anxious, we've all felt it, but if it's excessive, it's, oh gee, this is worse than normal. I'm waking up and my first thoughts are fear or around worry. I'm going to bed and I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm worried about certain things. Feeling sad or down in that persistent manner. And extreme mood changes of highs and lows. These might be symptoms that you're not used to because of your MS stuff that might be more related to your mood and your mental health. Not finding joy in the things that normally bring you joy. I can't tell you how important this is, and papers have shown us that this is important for people with MS. This one. There was a study, and I won't be able to tell you which one because I can't remember, but in a previous presentation I've given that said, couldn't we screen people with MS for depression on 2 questions? One was, are you feeling sadder than usual? And the other one was, are you experiencing joy in things that normally bring you joy? And just asking those 2 questions often led to the same diagnosis as asking a big battery of questions for depression or anxiety. So this one's a really important one for people with MS we've found in the literature. So if you say to yourself, well, I'm really not finding joy in the things that I expect to find joy in, that's something to really take notice of. I had a client once who I really thought he was depressed, and we talked quite a bit about the fact that I thought that maybe he was depressed, and he kept saying, I'm not depressed, I'm just like, I've been diagnosed with MS, it's a big deal, I'm having reaction, that's fine. And I get it, like, yeah, you're allowed to have a reaction, you're human, you're meant to feel something when this happens. But I was just working with him gently, saying maybe there's a bit of depression. And then he went to the footy one weekend, we'd worked for a while together. He went to the footy one weekend and he came into my office that week and he was like, I went to the footy. I said, how was it? He goes, my team won. I go, okay, well, what's going on? He goes, I didn't care at all. I sat there. I knew I should have been excited. I knew I should have felt, I'm in the crowd, everyone. I felt nothing. And I thought, man, maybe she's right. And I felt a little bit smug, which was not a thing a psychologist should say, but I did. And so then we were able to work on it. It was great. We had some positive outcomes. But that's a really important one to remember. Do you notice, or, keep it in the back of your mind, are you withdrawing a little bit more from friendships, from friends? Are you avoiding? Now, this is particularly hard following COVID because we all withdrew from everyone because we had to. And we actually got to a point, not everyone, but a lot of us, we got to a point where we didn't mind that. We actually, that was kind of good. And since then, we've actually been able to have a little bit of a plausible reason for, look, I'm not going to come, I'm not feeling particularly comfortable. My last, vaccine was a long time ago, or are people wearing masks, whatever. But we've been able to get out of things much more easily. People understand. We're not as criticised, mostly. So we just have to be mindful. Are we doing that because we don't mind a little pyjamas on the couch tonight? That's what I'll be doing. Or is it because this is a red flag and we're struggling with something? I recently went to a conference, same one, for MS nurses, and an MS nurse who's just retired, his name's John, some of you may know him, he used to work in regional area, gave a wonderful presentation on burnout in MS nurses. Wonderful presentation. Now, he spoke a little bit about his earlier career in a different area, not working with people with MS, but in a different area, where he was a much younger nurse and he gave it his all. He still gave it his all to retirement, but he was giving it his all. It was a really difficult job. And he kept telling himself he was fine. I'm fine, I'm fine. I'm there for my patients. I'm fine, I'm fine. And he knew he wasn't fine, but he wasn't owning up to it. And he said that the moment he realised that he was not okay in terms of his mental health was when he was in his office doing the work he loved with the clients that he loved, and the phone rang and he could not pick it up. He said, I just couldn't. I couldn't. It was this classic avoidance. I couldn't pick it up. It was too much. I just couldn't do one more thing for one more person. And it was at that moment where he realised, oh gee, this is not how I want to be coping in my life. I'm not coping. What do I need to do? And he was able to find the support But I thought that was a really good example of being mindful and curious about your own experience. You know, when you notice something about yourself, like that moment when he just noticed he couldn't pick up the phone. It's important to notice those things and don't just skip over it, but just pause for a second and go, whoa, that's interesting. What does that tell me about myself?
So Lisa, when you get help, when you, sometimes you'll be like that, you go to a doctor and all that, and you go and see someone and you say, I just don't know where I am.
Yes.
So how do you find an answer to that question?
Yes, well, at the end of this presentation, no, I'm just joking. It's such a complex answer, right? So going to your doctor to find help, hopefully there will be avenues that your doctor can link you into more formalised support, like seeing a psychologist, but also other supports that we'll talk about, like peer support or contacting MS+, friends, family, someone to talk to. There are a whole lot of things that we can do in terms of formalised supports, but also things we can do for ourselves that I'll talk about.
Well, see, I got into trouble with MS, not with the MS, but with COVID, with everything shutting down. And
Yes.
Kim got me into doing a phone support with the Geelong group, which sort of helped. But yeah,
it does help.
So you got totally isolated. And,
yes.
And you say to people, I've got no one to talk to, or that, and they just sort of look stupid at you and say, oh, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. I think you've highlighted a really good point though, because you found a little bit of benefit in a strategy that Kim suggested, which is a great strategy. Yeah. And the thing with mental health and protecting ourselves from mental illness and building our mental health is it's not one thing. It is a multitude of little things. Yeah. So that one is a big one, but there are other little things that we can all try and do for ourselves and link into supports to get them to help us to do as well.
The thing is to find the first one to get you on the track. Now I've got a partner here, and that's
Yeah.
made a big difference. So,
Yeah, huge difference.
You know, but until you can get that and someone to talk to, and that sort of people just ignore you and say, oh, you know, you just got to talk to someone. But then where do you find someone to talk to when no one wants to talk to you?
And another point is that when you are at your lowest of your lows, you don't feel like being the squeaky wheel and asking again and again and again for somebody to take notice and help you.
You get knocked back that way.
Yeah, you just think, what's the point?
What's the point of
Yeah,
it?
yeah. The other things to look for are problems with alcohol or drug use. So legitimately, are you having one extra glass of wine than you normally would? It's a red flag. Just be aware of it. Everyone's laughing. There are people giggling here. You're enjoying the wine, aren't you? That's okay. But just be mindful of it. How much am I having? Is this normal? Is it an indicator that things are a little bit rocky for me at the moment? Are you having major changes in eating habits? Some people report an absolute loss of appetite. Some people do a whole lot more comfort eating, depending on their mood. And is there excessive anger, hostility, or violence happening for you, or are you seeing it in someone else? Because of course, these are symptoms of a lowered mental health state. If you're seeing it in someone else, and we've all seen in friends and family these little red flags, I think it's important for us to be aware and maybe check in with them. We'll talk about that later. Also, I wanted to pop this dot point, of course. Is there any suicidal thinking happening? Now, I want to acknowledge that this is not an easy topic, and if anybody needs to just get up and have a little walk, I completely understand. If you want to talk to me afterwards, that's fine too. But I just want to make the point that it's really important that we're aware that suicidal thinking is not about having a gun and you're about to use it. That's kind of an old-fashioned idea of, well, if I don't have a gun and I'm about to use it, then I'm not suicidal. I don't want you to fall for that, because sometimes we can see this little creeping in of unhelpful thinking, which is around, the very earliest signs are, if I went to sleep tonight and didn't wake up tomorrow, that'd be okay. Now, I want to acknowledge that's not suicidal thinking, but it's also something that needs attention, because that's not fun. Nobody wants to go to bed thinking, I wouldn't mind if I didn't wake up. That's not okay. And there's help for that. There's help to help shift your mood to get you out of that spot. And that spot continues down to thinking about how maybe people in your life would be better off if you weren't here, or maybe it would be just easier to not live with this pain. There are so many different things that can classify as difficult thinking around suicidal thought. So please just be aware of that. And we're talking all about these things as signs of poor mental health and things that we need to just be aware of so that we can get some help. If these things are happening for more than 2 weeks, and maybe even less than that. If you're noticing a few of the right-hand column, we've probably got most of the left-hand column already because we have MS, but if you're noticing a few more than usual, it's time to act on it. It's time to say, well, this is rubbish. I don't want to live with these things going on. I didn't mean that literally, but I want to change this and I want to have some help. And there are better ways to function in the world than living with this. Oh, and then it comes out a little bit. And then will it change? There we go. So without going through all of these words, stay with me, stay awake. This is basically a nice kind of colourful picture of the mental health continuum where, believe it or not, the vast majority of the population are in that middle section called surviving. Now, I don't know about you, as much as I love Survivor, the show that Paul talked about earlier, I don't want to be in surviving mode. Like, I want to be up at excelling. But can you imagine being in excelling? Look at those dot points. Cheerful, joyful, energetic, this is all the time. High performance, float, fully realising potential. Wow, we can all aspire, right, to that one. But I think if we're somewhere between surviving and thriving, that's where I would want everybody to aim for when you are somebody living in Melbourne or surrounds, in busy lives with a chronic health condition. I want you to be somewhere in there. Because, I mean, look at surviving, it's not very aspirational. I'm a little bit worried, I could be a little bit nervous, but it's also human, right? So we have worries in life. We do, we all do. That's okay, that's normal, unfortunately, in a way. To all have a little bit of worry, a little bit nervous, you can get a little bit irritable, you can experience a bit of sadness. There might be some trouble sleeping, a bit distracted, but really we want to be pushing up. We want to be doing the things that we can do to get into that thriving state, where you're feeling more positive, where you're calmer. Being calm is a wonderful thing. Sleeping well would be good, etc. We certainly don't want to be in crisis, and that's the one under the red one down the bottom. I hope you can read it. If you can't, I know the slides will be available. I think, looking at Nigel, they'll be available. Yep, perfect. So, how do we help ourselves or someone close to us? The first step is really about the information, knowing and understanding the key components of mental health. We're going to go through them. They're the boring terms to begin with, the social, psychological, emotional health and physical health or well-being. But we're going to break it down so it's a bit more tangible. But we need to understand, where does our mental health come from? Because it comes from somewhere and it can be shaped, and we need to know how to shape it. And we're going to do that by knowing and practicing daily activities and habits that help just build that, to give us that psychological resilience, to make us just that little bit more robust. I often talk about it as bricks in a castle, or those big blocks of bluestone. If you consider one little strategy to be one block and just build up a whole lot of blocks so that when somebody fires something at your castle, you don't bring the whole thing down. You take a blow and you feel it like a challenge. That's tough, but you're still there and you're still going. So we need to do lots and lots and lots of little things to help maintain a good sense of mental health and well-being. Be accountable. Now remember, I'm talking about mental health. I'm not talking about mental illness. I am not somebody that says, well, if you just pulled your socks up and put a smile on, you wouldn't be so depressed. That is not how I work. But I think in terms of building our mental health, we're as accountable for that as we are for physical health, for doing what we're able to do to look after our bodies. We need to do what we're able to do to look after our minds as well, and to look after our families, to look after our friends. We should have some accountability in showing ourselves some compassion and looking after ourselves. And you need to know when to get some extra help. We just covered that, by the way, so I hope you've got that down pat now. Some little red flags, some little symptoms, or little, that's not really me, being really curious about ourselves. I feel uncomfortable, I don't normally feel this way. Maybe I need to reach out and get some help. It's not as scary as you think. So what are the key components of mental health? If anybody wants to stand up, stretch, I don't mind if you do it while we're, okay. Emotional well-being. So emotional well-being, if we talk about emotional well-being, it's pretty much, we ask people, are you happy? How are you going? The neurologist will say to you, how are you going? You go, well, yeah, I'm okay. And then they go, tick, they're emotionally fine. Great. Because if you don't say, I'm depressed and I can't get out of bed, you must be fine. You're fine, you're okay. We measure it in happiness levels. Oh, I'm pretty happy. Great, phew, that's lucky. And our interest in things. Are we still interested in things? Are we going to work? Are we catching up with family? Are we doing things? Are we leaving our house? Oh yeah, tick, 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 great. But what emotional well-being really refers to is a bit around happiness and our ability to engage, but it's also about recognising, expressing and modulating emotions. And these are big concepts. So this is about actually knowing how you're feeling moment to moment. How am I feeling about this? How am I responding to this situation? Am I feeling sad? Why do I feel sad? Can I express my sadness to someone else? And the regulating means, am I expressing my sadness at appropriate times? Am I expressing my anger when actually I should be angry? Or am I pushing it down? That's not emotionally healthy, but also not healthy to be screaming at anyone, mostly, sometimes. How can we improve it? Well, I'm putting the things that I want you to try at home in bold. So I'd love you to do this, but this is a bigger concept. This is a great thing to do with a psychologist or a counsellor. Be curious about your thoughts, emotions and behaviours and how they interact with each other. Look at your self-talk. One thing you could do is every morning, this is fascinating exercise, I think, but I'm a psychologist, so I understand. But if you wake up, when you wake up every morning, just have a quick check-in with yourself. What was the first thing I thought this morning? Because often I try to work on this stuff too. Often I will wake up and go, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do today. And that's okay, because I love everything that I do in life. I really do, I think I can say that. But boy, I pile it on sometimes and it's too much and I make myself feel overwhelmed and I wake up and think, oh my gosh, how am I going to do it? Why did I do this to myself? This kind of calendar of events. And so if I'm thinking that every day, that's something to be curious about. I wonder if I've got any control over doing anything about that. And most of us have little bits of control over some things that might make an impact. Not everything, but little things. So if you can, I didn't even put it in bold, but if you can, just take stock every day. What is the first thing that comes to mind? Because that's not you, that's your mind, which is a whole other esoteric kind of concept to talk about. But your mind presents you with a thought when you wake up. You don't think to yourself, I'm going to think about how overwhelmed I'm going to be this morning and think that. You don't. Your mind just presents you with something. So what is your mind presenting you with? Is it overly positive? Is it overly negative? Is it neutral? Is it something that you're looking forward to? Is it a deep, deep worry? It's really interesting to have a look, and I would encourage you to do that because you can change it. One of the best things we've learned in psychology over the last 20 years is that you can choose the way you think, which is extraordinary. It takes a lot of work, but you can change the way you think about things. It's hard, it's really hard, but you can do it. Engage in mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness is not meditation. Meditation's fantastic. Do it if you want, but meditation is really about going inward, quiet, still, inside. Mindfulness is about looking outward. Where are you? And one of my clients said to me, I practice mindfulness. Basically, I look at my boots and I say, where are my boots? Oh, I should be there. So if my boots are in the car, I should probably be in the car with them and thinking about the road. If my boots are at the children's birthday party, I should probably try to be here with my mind too, not worried about what that woman said to me on the bus the other day. So I love that. Know where your boots are and be there. That's what mindfulness is. And that will contribute to emotional well-being. However, I don't even want you to do that, although do that. But be outside. Here's an interesting one for emotional well-being. Spend 10 minutes a day outside, if you don't already, and then practice a bit of mindfulness there. For me, it's about walking. Not everybody's going to be walking around the block every day, but I realise that I walk around the block every day, not for physical health, because to be honest, I just walk, I don't run, it's only 10 minutes. But I do it with the dog, and it's not for physical health, although I'm hoping it has some benefit, but it is really about my emotional health. I walk around the block, I breathe in the air, I remind myself I'm a tiny speck of an ant on this land, and nothing really matters too much. Like just rein it in, stop thinking you're that important, like stop stressing about all the things, walk around, listen to the birds. Just to make sure that I link in with Paul's presentation earlier and talk about Succession, if you're not watching it, you really should. I love that show, and it's just dropping an episode once a week, and it's the last season. And so because I can't stand waiting for the week, I also am now engaging in podcasts that talk about the show. Paul is nodding, he knows the one I'm talking about. And the other day, literally just 2 days ago, on Thursday, I thought I'm going to walk 10 minutes around the block, and this is the first time I'm going to listen to that podcast because I just wanted to engage in that world that I miss between episodes. And it was great. I listened to that, walked around the block. I'm just not somebody that normally walks and listens to music or podcasts. And I got back to my desk, because I was in a little break, got back to my desk, took the earphones out, and I often talk to myself. No one else is there, it's okay. But I sat down with a smile and said, I can't do that again. And I thought, that's so interesting. I was curious about my experience because I loved it. But I loved it like sitting on my couch in my jammies watching Succession at night. And at 12:10 on a Thursday, I actually find much more benefit in walking around the block, not with noise, just with my thoughts, just processing. It's so beneficial to have 10 minutes with nothing. I've got the dog, she's all right. I've got the cars and the birds. And I realised I would have spent that 10 minutes just feeling probably pretty proud of myself for doing a little bit of paperwork that morning, mentally saying I've done a couple of things that I needed to achieve, and also thinking what I was about to face that afternoon, and I'd stolen that from myself. So I got back to my desk, I only had 5 minutes until a client came online, all on Zoom, and I had to cram what I would have done in that 10 minutes of thinking into those few little minutes. So I can't tell you the benefit of 10 minutes with nothing. It's so noisy up here. And it's so hard to put your phone down and just sit in a chair and do nothing. Honestly, it's so hard. We all know it. But just do it. No TV, no books, no phone, no music, just nothing. It's really hard. That's why I like to do it when I walk, but you know. But if being outside doesn't appeal to you, because sitting outside is just as good for that. Doesn't have to be exercise related. It's just about being aware of who you are and processing things. This is the one I want you to do. Everybody, I'm yet to meet someone, so please come and tell me if you don't meet this criteria. Everybody can plan something to look forward to, everybody. And I've worked with people in dire situations, and they have shocked me at what they have come up with in terms of what they're looking forward to. Everybody can, and everybody should. And we should all get a calendar on your phone, on the kitchen wall, whatever you want, and say, right, what am I doing this month that I am looking forward to, genuinely looking forward to? You don't have to include family barbecues if you do not like them. So just don't pretend with me. What am I genuinely looking forward to? Succession is an easy thing to write on the calendar, but if you're not into Succession, I'm sorry, I won't talk about it anymore. But if you're not into that, you're probably looking at something else on Netflix that you're looking forward to, or a new book, or going to the movies with a friend, or a conversation with a friend, a nice cup of coffee. Pick anything. I've recently discovered, not that recently, that I love singing really loudly in the car. Now, it's just silly, and I do not sound like Adele. I've used that joke before, but I don't. But I enjoy that. Now my children are 14 and 12, and they will not have it. But when they were younger, I used to get away with it, and that makes me laugh and smile. So think of something. Maybe don't put that one in your calendar, but you could. The benefit is in the doing the thing that's going to bring you joy, but this emotional well-being benefit is having something to look forward to. It's so important. You don't rob yourself of it. Go and do it. And practice doing it, because it doesn't come naturally until you're in the habit, and then it comes naturally. Then you don't even have to summon the willpower, you just do it. Psychological well-being. How do we measure it? Is this person functioning effectively? Are they up and around? Are they doing things? Are they engaged? Are they managing their stress? What do we really mean by psychological well-being? Does this person feel that they have a purpose in life? Do they find meaning in things? Do they have autonomy? So does that means, can they back themselves? And are they doing things? Is there a level of independence? And are they confident in what they want to do and how they can do it? And is there a level of self-acceptance? Psychological well-being is a lot around, gee, I like myself. And that's not an easy thing for everybody to say. But liking yourself, or discovering elements of yourself that are likeable, that you can say, oh, I'm proud of that person, that part of me, that's really important for psychological well-being. How can we get it? Look, I bolded the first one. Set yourself some goals. Just have some goals. And then meet them. Make them realistic. Please don't make unrealistic goals, because then you set yourself up for failure, and then the whole psychological well-being thing crumbles. So they need to be realistic goals that you know you're going to meet, So you can tick a box. And if you're anything like me, you like a paper and pen list, you can put a line through it and you feel like, yes, I did something today. So I ask clients sometimes, what are the goals for today? You know, what are you about to achieve? And a couple of clients have given me some really great examples. Somebody said, I wasn't expecting this. I thought she would say walking around the block. But she said, actually, I'd like to drink 2 glasses of water a day. And I thought, oh, well, great goal. Great. I wasn't expecting her to say it. I wasn't expecting it to be something that I had assessed in my mind is quite simple. Like, that's just terrible for me to say that, because that was not a simple goal for her. It's something she's always wanted to do. She knew she needed to be more hydrated, and she knew she'd get a sense of achievement if she did it. So we just wrote up a really simple little table that she stuck on the fridge, and she ticked boxes because that feels good. And she nailed her 2 glasses of water every day and could show me the list when she came back, and she felt good. And she said, now I'm ready for a bigger goal. Brilliant. So she'd instilled in herself a sense of, I can do this, and look at me go. Her next goal was, and maybe people will relate, I would like to have a shower every second day, and I want to wash my own hair once a week. So for the women in the room and for the men, of course, we know that sometimes washing our hair is absolutely exhausting and you may not have the energy to do it. And it just means you might not be able to use your arms for the rest of the day. However that affects you in MS, but that was one of her goals and she was able to do it. A shower every second day, washing her hair once a week. Just little things that could rebuild that confidence and that sense of accomplishment. You figure out your goals, whatever they are. Just find some little goals and set them and meet them, and it feels good. Practice gratitude. This is a big one that I love. I should watch the time because I can talk and talk. Set some goals, practice gratitude. Everyone still with me? Awake? Keep going? Okay. I'm a big fan of this. For me, it's about being grateful for things, but it's also about reliving something during the day that made you smile. For me, it's about that, much more so than I'm grateful for food on the table. That's important too. But for me, if I can remember something that made me laugh during the day and bring it to my mind just before I go to bed, if I can actually laugh again, then I know I was on a winner, because you're getting double the chemical benefit of the joy for one instance. There was one moment that made you laugh and you got double the benefit. That's great. If you can think about those things before you go to bed, rather than the things or the worries you've got going on the next day, even better. Yes, Christine?
When I go to bed, I say, what was the best thing that happened today?
Brilliant.
What was the worst thing?
Oh.
And I've always got, 3 things to choose between as the best thing.
Great.
So it wasn't a bad day after all.
Fantastic. Can I ask you why you review the bad thing that happened during the day?
To find things aren't as bad as I think.
Okay. Yep. Sorry. The lady in the audience was just saying that before she goes to bed at night, she reviews 3 things, 3 good things or 3 bad things, or a combination. The worst thing and the best thing that happened to her during the day, so that she can have a look and just do a realistic appraisal that maybe things were not as bad as she might have felt during the day. Yeah. It's good. It's much better to go to bed thinking about something that you enjoyed. It makes sense, doesn't it? And yet we don't actually do it very often. We go to bed thinking about the things that were pretty awful, or the things that we've got going on tomorrow or next week, or the worries. Those worries are still there. Don't worry. They're not going anywhere. But why they're still going to be there tomorrow morning is my point. You can worry about them tomorrow. But tonight, before bed, think about something that actually was enjoyable, because that also happened. So why not give that a little bit more credit? Stress management and coping strategies. These are all like blah, 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 blah as well, aren't they? Because, we should all do stress management. What does that mean? Coping strategies, what does that mean? These are good things to discuss with other people, therapists, counsellors. Psychological well-being, it comes down to that identity. Who am I? What's my identity? Where do I find my meaning? What is my purpose? Everybody needs a purpose. Everybody needs a purpose. Somebody famous, I was Googling it all night last night. Was it Winston Churchill? Was it Einstein? I couldn't find it. Somebody good said, the only things we need in life are a job and someone to love. And I agree, except I kind of changed a little bit. I think we all need something to do. You need something that brings you purpose and meaning, and you need a human connection. I think you need both of those things in order to maintain a good level of quality of life. It's really important to do something that you enjoy doing, that you feel benefit from. Paul said he never aims to retire. It's the best thing. It's the best thing. You just want to continue to do things that bring you meaning and purpose. Doesn't have to be paid. VIA strengths. I wrote that in bold. If you haven't come across it, Google it. It's just Google VIA strengths and it'll come up. It's a really well-used, well-respected, I'm going to guess maybe 90 question, maybe 100 question questionnaire that will tell you what your core strengths are. I can't remember all the stats. Maybe there are 30 strengths. You'll get your top 6 strengths emailed back to you. It's free. They'll give you payment options to have bigger, better reports. You don't need to do them. Just get the free version. It'll tell you what your biggest strengths are. Can be a game changer. Have a look at it and do things in accordance with those strengths because you're already good at that stuff. And if you engage in activities relating to those strengths, you'll do well in those activities. It'll make you feel good. You want to do more of it. So it helps build that cycle. I encourage you to do that one. All right, social well-being. How do we measure it? Do you have good relationships with people? Like that's a pretty good measure of social well-being. How's this person going socially? But really what it means is that you have a sense of belonging, that you have your people, that you have a sense of community, that you are valued, but the most important part of social well-being is that you feel like you're contributing, that you bring value to others. This is a really important part of mental health. What do you offer other people? Because if you feel like you're not offering people anything, your mental health is at risk. How can you offer somebody else something of value? Go and find someone and give them something of yours that's valuable. I'm not talking about dollars, but maybe it's time, maybe it's listening, maybe it's a smile, it's something. This can extend from going and volunteering at a soup kitchen to just being the person that always waves at the neighbour, particularly when you know that the neighbour might be a bit isolated, maybe doesn't get a lot of visitors. Do something for somebody else. How can we improve social wellbeing? Effective communication is key in this, particularly if we zoom back to family, friends, the relationships that we have with the people in our lives. Learning good communication skills with them is super important for our social wellbeing. I've just said that one, give to others. So often a strategy that I will talk to clients about, particularly, to be honest, particularly to older men, or men generally actually, is to encourage them. So when men are facing mental health issues or when they are experiencing symptoms of depression, they are more likely than women, but women as well, to withdraw, to be isolated, to not want to talk to other people. And so often we see in research of Australian men in particular that in their 20s they've got heaps of mates and by the time they're 30 they have maybe a handful, maybe if they're lucky. So we really need to encourage men to keep up those interactions with other men and women, have that social interaction. It is very, very important. Something that I've worked on with men who are experiencing symptoms of depression is around encouraging them to engage with other people. It's not what they feel like doing. They're depressed. They're like, I don't want to call anyone.
Well, that's what I found out. People just don't want to know you've got mental health problems.
Yep.
You know, they won't talk to you.
Right.
They just turn their backs to you.
Yes.
So how do you overcome that
Right.
problem? Well, that's not easy.
It's not easy. So my advice is often men who are struggling with their mental health know that there are other men that they've come across in their lives that are probably also struggling with their mental health. So I encourage my clients to pick up the phone and do a welfare check on their friends. And not a welfare check, just a check in and say hello. So often, and I've spoken to men who say, oh, all right, well, my brother-in-law, he lives by himself, maybe in the country, and maybe that guy from high school, I know his wife recently passed away. All right, maybe I'll give them a go. So I'm thinking of a particular client. He called a couple of guys that he thought, probably wouldn't mind him calling just to check in. He came back to me and said, oh my gosh, they were so appreciative that I called, that I got a kick out of it. It made me feel good. I called them, I made their day. Nobody had called them for weeks. I felt valuable. I felt like I meant something. It made me feel a little bit better. Now it's a little bit of a, just in that moment, but then of course, you know what I'm going to come back with, Ken? I'm going to say, well, can we put that in your diary to call them once a month?
Why not?
I do that with someone now.
Perfect.
Because we were in a similar situation.
Yes.
He was in good dress and I was depressed. And
Yep.
actually, I took him to a clearance sale and he said that was a big turning point because I got to talk to some people I hadn't seen for years.
Yes.
And he said, unless you've been in that sort of a hellhole.
Yes.
Because he found the same thing. He tried to talk to people and they wouldn't talk to him.
Yes.
And sort of it just, I took him to this clearance sale and he said that was changing point. And I got bad depression after that.
Yeah.
And sort of he talked to me and he's trying to figure a way out, but yeah,
Yes.
other circumstances changed and yeah, they come right.
I like the point that you're making, Ken, that I think it's really important if you can link in with somebody else that you think might be struggling as well, that can have tremendous benefits for both parties. And remembering here that we're talking about increasing mental health, levels of mental health. It is a different situation, but still important when we're talking about clinical depression. But connections with community and other people is super important. So I really want to recommend that as the bold one here, that reaching out to somebody else who's struggling, it helps us as well. And we might be struggling too. It will help both parties. You've got to have a big breath to do it, but it's really beneficial. And if you're not really suffering, if you might be feeling a little bit fragile in your mental health, but not at the depths of the depths, then why not start doing this now? Because you will feel good about yourself if you've made somebody else's day, and they will feel better. So it's win-win-win, and you're getting it into your habit, getting into your routine, and building your resilience for when challenges come along later. Oh, and then I said, find your people, which is what Ken's talking about. It's hard. Find your people now. If you're not in a state of mental illness, but you are somewhere on the continuum of mental health, find your people now. And they can be anyone. They can be these people. Finding like-minded people that share a similarity like having MS. They're good people to have as your people. But there's also so many groups out there that you can join, that you can develop relationships with, because we know that people who have lots of connections with community are going to do better in the mental health stakes. We know it. So get on it. My dad, who is 79, yes, I should know that, 79 this year, and his wife, who is similar, have just joined a bridge group. I never thought that he would play bridge. And he's like, why not? Meet new people, have something to do, off I go. He just honestly encapsulates a lot of this, which is just being very proactive in making sure he is busy with purpose and meaning and connections. He doesn't know I use him as an example sometimes. Physical well-being. How do we measure physical well-being? Of course, muscle strength, aerobic fitness, body mass index, my least favourite. And we measure it very, black and white. It's difficult for people with MS when we're looking at physical well-being because we have so much that can affect our ability to increase our level of physical well-being. But we need to remember that mental and physical fitness are intertwined, and they are both impacted by these three horrible things: sleep, diet, and exercise. When our wonderful neurologist before was talking about what could we maybe do for our brains to limit the neurodegeneration and inflammation, I thought, I wonder whether we'll get a chance to touch on brain health, which of course is kind of a new buzzword in MS at the moment, but brain health is important. We've got to look after our brains to the best of our ability. Sleep, sleep. If you can get it, sorry Paul, he mentioned having bad sleep earlier. Sleep is a big deal. If you can do something to improve your sleep quality, please try it. Diet, of course, is important because it's the fuel we're putting into our body. It's the fuel that's, informing our brains. And of course, exercise is important in any form you can get. The thing in bold from physical well-being, I didn't want to say, make sure you have half an hour of exercise. No, go to bed. Go to bed at the same time every day and get up at the same time every day. That's what the researchers tell us, time and time again. If you want to live your best life and you can get to bed not long after the sun goes down, if you can get up at the same time as the sun, that's a bit early, then that's the best thing to do for your body. Rise when the sun gets up. 5. Are you up at 5, Nigel? Oh. No, I thought you were telling me that. No. We'll pretend Nigel gets up at 5. He's very good about this issue. Yes. You're up at 5.
Every day.
Is that because you can't sleep or because you want to get up at 5? What do you do at 5 o'clock?
I go to the toilet, go back to bed.
Oh. There was a glimmer of hope. I thought you were going to say, I get up, I go for a walk, I look at the sunrise. I thought, this is the guy, I planted him earlier. Yeah, well, I think many people could probably relate. Well, you get up at some time, like I get up at 4 and go to the toilet, yeah. And at 2 and at 3. Yeah. 5, yeah. So that's a great small thing that we can do. It's actually not that small, is it? Let's be honest. Going to bed at the same time every day and getting up at the same time every morning is actually really difficult. Most of us, fall into the idea that we need to sleep in on weekends. And why wouldn't you want to? If you've had a busy week, then sure. But if you want to make a little difference and see what happens, you could try this one. I love the approach. Sometimes when I work with clients and when I try to convince myself to do good things, of saying, hey, I'm going to be a scientist and I'm going to run an experiment for 1 month. And maybe I'll try gratitude journal for a month and see if it makes a difference. Maybe I'll try getting up and going to bed at the same time for a month and see if it makes a difference. Like, this is your life. Why wouldn't you play around with it and see what works best for you? I've never been said anything like this before, but a week ago I decided to stop drinking coffee. I thought, I'll just give it, I know, gasps. I've always been a really headachy person. I've always had headaches. And then I started one of the MS disease-modifying therapies many years ago and got really bad headaches and said to the MS nurse, I'm getting really bad headaches. Is that because of this drug? And she said, oh, you'd only get that if you had lots of headaches before the drug. And I said, I did have lots of headaches before the drug. She goes, oh, that's from that then. Oh, nobody told me about that. And so I've had all these terrible drugs, all these terrible headaches. And then somebody finally convinced me, and I've been to headache clinics, and they said, oh, I only had 1 coffee a day. They said, oh, don't, like, 1 coffee's fine, don't worry about it. And then somebody said to me, just try not having coffee. And I was like, oh, I had your reaction. But then I thought, why not? Why not try it? And then if it doesn't work, I'll go back to it. And so I haven't had coffee now for probably 8 days, and I've only had 2 headaches. Normally I have them daily. So that's like shocked me. So I'll keep it up for a month and see what happens.
And you're awake.
I'm awake. I know, and I'm still coherent maybe, but some people are asleep, but that's okay. So I really encourage you to run little experiments in your life and see what happens, because why not? You might feel better on one of these measures. And so the point is, if we can make little incremental differences across all of these categories, then your level of mental well-being will just raise up a little bit. And then that will protect you a little bit from going down into the depths if a challenge comes along, or if something happens, like a challenge coming along. And a recent study, probably not that recent, can't read it, you could probably read it better than me, from 2018, not that early, not that recent. An hour of physical activity a week prevented 12% of new cases of depression. So that's extraordinary. Get outside. A little bit more exercise is always good for us. What can you do? All right, what's the time? Oh, it's 2:25. Be informed about mental health. So you've just now informed, well done. You'll get an A. Choose a couple of things. So I've just brought the bolded things into this. This is what you're going to go home and do? I don't know. Can you choose a couple of these? I'll read them out. Choose a couple, put them into your head. You're going to give these a go tonight or tomorrow. Plan for joy. Literally put it in your diary. Don't just say, yeah, I should do more joyful things. That's not it. That's morning television. That's listening to morning television and saying, yeah, I should do more things that are enjoyable. No. I'm the psychologist. Go home and do your homework. Put some things in your calendar that you can then look forward to. They're going to set you up for positive mood experiences, but it's about looking forward them. Do things that interest you. Paul, he said, it's the passion about writing. When he's writing, he's in the best place he can be. So find the things that interest you and do them. Find them. Try lots of different things. Some things you won't enjoy. Some things you'll love. Do more of it. Set some goals. Please go set some goals. It doesn't have to be stopping coffee. It could be drinking water, showering, could be, Reach out to someone who's lonely or struggling. Give it a go. There are lots of people to choose from. You all know a few of them. And if you are one of them, then I'm even more excited for you if you do this homework, because it could make a difference to you, which is amazing. And go to bed and get up at the same time each day. That's quite hard. I'm not very good at that one, so I can't pretend that I am. I go to bed late and I shouldn't. So get some support. Intervention is key for those in crisis, But intervention is also key for those who are struggling with prevention, struggling with building their resilience and building their mental health. It's so powerful, I think, to go and see someone. And so I'll use a psychologist as an example. But you go see a psychologist not because you're mentally ill, but because you actually want to build your mental health. And you go along to them and you say, I want to build my mental health. Can we discuss some strategies that are relevant to you? Don't let them be relevant to the psychologist because they've got their own, oh, they're not drinking coffee, whatever. If you don't want to not drink coffee, don't listen to them. Do what's important to you. But they should be able to help you find out what those important things are for you and discuss it with them. Have some accountability there because they'll help you stay on track. And, you know, run experiments and see if you feel any better after a couple of sessions with the psychologist. And then if you don't, you say goodbye. You don't have to stay with them forever. You know, and there's arguments to say you shouldn't. What can you do? Talk to your family and friends. Let them know you're struggling. Now, I know this is easy for me to say, but often it's just on deaf ears. Or, as Ken said, you tell someone you're struggling and they're like, oh, okay, well, good to see you again. See you later. They don't really want to hang out with you because if you're really suffering, you are not good company.
Something more on that. One person came in, I was in bed and I was really depressed and all that. And all I got is you should get out of bed and blah, 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 blah. Whole mouthful. And about 3 months later, he tells me he's been struggling with depression. He knows what I went through. He wished he hadn't said all the things he said to me. And that, he totally depressed me, made me feel 10 times worse than I was. If you hadn't come in, so this is it. It's to find the people to talk to is one of the hardest.
Yes.
That's the hardest part of any of this, even going to see doctors, any professionals and that. So it's like getting a partner. People said, but you're totally changed. And I said, yeah, but I've got someone I'll talk to.
Yeah,
time.
Makes a massive difference.
Makes a massive difference.
Yes.
And I said, yeah, some people said, what happened to you? You've just gone like that.
You like it, yeah.
So I've heard you speak. This is the third time I've heard you speak, and this time I've picked up something from you.
Oh, good. Oh, that's very nice of you. Thank you.
Okay. In the mail.
Thank you. Well, look, to your point, Ken, if you're approaching somebody else who is not having a great time and you want to check in with them, don't try to fix it. You know, Ken's saying that one of his friends was saying, get out of bed, just do it, just get over it, what's the problem? The thing we can do for others and the things we want if we're going to reach out and tell somebody we're struggling, we want somebody to be able to listen, we want somebody to validate, we want somebody to say, that sounds hard. You know, you can't imagine how, maybe you can, how wonderful it is to just have someone say, oh, that sucks. I'm really sorry that you're going through it. Yeah.
I'd actually add to that first line.
Yes.
Talk to your family and friends or anybody else.
Anybody else.
It doesn't have to be family and friends because that can be really hard. Admitting that you're struggling.
Yes.
You know, admitting to family or friends that you are struggling.
Yes.
Sometimes a stranger can end up being, you know, your best friend in that situation.
Yep, absolutely.
Or, you know, join a support group or, you know, something like that.
Yep.
Or somebody who's just an acquaintance rather than a relative.
Yes, I agree, and that's a great point to make.
Because sometimes family and friends don't understand.
No, and sometimes it can come back and bite you in ways that you don't want down the track. I guess what I would love is for people to be able to be genuine with people that they're surrounded by about how they're going, because it will make things easier if that's a receptive audience. So, hey, you're right, talk to anybody about it. Having it come out of your face is a really good step to then building on and developing new strategies, better strategies to cope with it. So test the waters if you want. But telling people who are very significant in your life can be a game changer if they are open to hearing it and supporting you in the right way. Check in with people, you know, like you're calling the guy who lives in the country and you want to check in with him because he's had a recent change of circumstance, you know he might be doing it tough. Call him and make it regular. Check in a lot. Speak to your GP. Arrange a mental health care plan. I know we've already touched on this already today. NDIS support will fund psychology if it's related to your goals. I encourage you to put it in your goals so you can access it. Mental health care plans, don't get me started on how difficult that is. I was really pleased the neurologist in his presentation said that Medicare will subsidise your sessions with a psychologist. I don't know any bulk billing psychologists, so there's always an out-of-pocket fee. However, NDIS support is there if you can access that. You do not have to have a mental illness to get help. That's what I really want to come out of today. Remember, mental illness is very different to mental health, and raising our mental health, and there's a continuum. Mental illness is different. We're slowly moving in society away from this idea of, well, I don't have a mental illness, so I can't go to see a psychologist. You don't need a mental illness to see a psychologist. You just want to have a goal of doing something a little bit differently about protecting yourself from depression or anxiety down the track, or actually just increasing your own quality of life. These are the things that we should be talking to health professionals about. Call MS Plus, they're such a great resource. They can really put you in touch with so many different people and groups, and can, you know, the power of peer support is tremendous. Kim is up the back and is going to wave her hand if anybody wants to talk to, is that okay, Kim, that I say that? If anybody wants to talk to Kim, yes.
I would just like to say
yes,
that your presentation, Sally, is absolutely fantastic, and I have got 4 little points that I have got from what you said today. First of all, have effective communication
yes,
with either family or whatever. Try to be positive. Be involved with others or in other activities, and also set yourself goals.
yes. Thank you. That's a great takeaway. Thank you. Now you can print that out for everybody. They can take that home. I appreciate it.
I hope the people at the back heard.
Yes, thank you. And then lastly, right there at the end, I've just said that you can always call Lifeline, and please don't underestimate them. They're really good. I say that probably because I was a counsellor at Lifeline many, many years, probably 20 years ago. And they are just trained to listen and to hear and validate what you're going through, to allow you to be in the moment with them, to express something, and then just ease that burden for that moment. They do not need you to be suicidal to call them. They just want you to give them a call to talk about something, to ease it so you can keep moving. Don't underestimate that they're there for you as well as for everybody else that is suffering at the moment, and always. So please don't ever feel, you know, embarrassed to pick up the call and talk to someone. Pick up the phone and talk to someone. And there's just my email address. If you have any questions from today, please don't hesitate to grab me now at the end, or to email me with any questions you might have or comments. And you may have questions now. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Nigel.
And we will just take a couple of questions. Yes. Christy.
Sometimes what I do, if I haven't got somebody else to talk to, I'll put a chair opposite and imagine myself in the chair, and I'm the psychologist, and I'll ask myself counsellor type questions and try and work out what's going on and realise
Brilliant.
what's going on.
Brilliant. I love it. That's so good because you're taking... Oh, sorry, Nigel.
I'm just going to repeat what Christine said. Christine said if you haven't got anybody else to talk to, you can actually imagine somebody sitting in the chair opposite you, or imagine yourself sitting in the chair opposite you and have that conversation.
Yes, and I love it because it's a way of really encouraging your emotional health and well-being by taking a moment for self-reflection, for processing what's going on, for being curious and being an observer in your own life and thinking, what's going on for me there? Shout at that chair, do it. Also writing things down. If you ever, you're struggling with it and you don't know what to do with it, write it down. Then rip it up. You don't need to have it lying around for other people to read, but write it down, get it out. Good idea. Everybody wants to go home, and I understand that.
Well, all right. Which one is it? That one. That one. Yes. So.
Oh, there's one more question here. Sorry.
I can speak to you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So join with me and thank Sally for a...
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Nigel.
Very much. Look, we've been incredibly lucky today. We've had 3 excellent speakers. But I also hope that you've all got something out of just being here together today. Thank you very much for attending.